They laughed when the scarred blacksmith stepped into the alley. They stopped laughing when she broke the first man's jaw. Tonight, you're going to hear the story of a woman the kingdom tried to bury. A fighter they mocked, a warrior they dismissed, and the only person brave enough to stand between a mother and the knives meant for her throat. By the end, you'll understand why the most feared alpha king in the realm knelt before a forge worker everyone else called worthless. If you want to see how a blacksmith brought an empire to its knees, stay until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's begin. The moon hung like a broken promise over the city of Thornmarch, casting skeletal shadows through the narrow streets where decent people no longer walked after dark. Riven Ashford had never been decent, and she'd stopped caring about safety the day her father's forge went cold. Her boots struck the cobblestones with the rhythm of a war drum as she made her way home from the tavern where she'd just been laughed out for the third time that week. The Forge Masters Guild had rejected her application again. Too young, too female, too scarred. The council elder had actually wrinkled his nose when she'd shown him her work, a blade so perfectly balanced it could slice falling silk. "Blacksmithing is a man's trade," he'd said, his jowls quivering with certainty. "Go find yourself a husband, girl. Let him swing the hammer while you tend his hearth." The 12 other smiths in the hall had erupted in laughter. Not one had come to her defense. Riven's jaw still ached from how hard she'd clenched it to keep from speaking. Words wouldn't change their minds. In Thornmarch, a woman alone was either a whore, a wife, or a ghost. Riven had chosen a fourth option: invisible. She kept her head down, worked her father's old forge in the slums, and survived on commissions from merchants too cheap to pay guild prices. It was a small life, a suffocating life. But it was hers. She was 2 blocks from her forge when she heard the scream. It came from Widow's Alley, a slash of darkness between 2 abandoned warehouses, where even the rats had learned to fear the shadows. Riven's hand went to the knife at her belt, a habit from 6 years of walking these streets alone, and every instinct she'd honed told her to keep walking. Screams in Thornmarch were common as rain. Getting involved meant trouble, and trouble meant attention, and attention meant men asking questions she couldn't answer. But then she heard the voice again, and this time it wasn't just fear, it was defiance. "Stay back! I am warning you!" The voice was older, female, and shaking with a rage that Riven recognized in her bones. It was the sound of someone who'd been pushed too far, cornered too tight, and had nothing left to lose except dignity. Riven had made that sound once, 3 years ago, when 4 dock workers had cornered her outside a supply merchant's shop. They'd thought a lone woman carrying coin was easy prey. They'd been wrong. She'd broken 2 noses, 1 kneecap, and a man's pride before the city guard arrived. The guards had arrested her for disturbing the peace. She'd spent 2 days in a cell before the merchant, who'd witnessed the whole thing, paid her fine and hired her to make his door hinges. The memory made Riven's lips curl into something that wasn't quite a smile. She turned into Widow's Alley. 5 men formed a half circle around a figure pressed against the warehouse wall. Moonlight glinted off drawn swords, not the cheap iron of common thugs, but steel. Good steel, military steel. These weren't dock workers or cut purses. These were soldiers. And the woman they'd cornered was dressed in clothing too fine for this part of town. A traveling cloak that had probably cost more than Riven earned in 6 months. Rich. Lost. Stupid enough to wander where she didn't belong. None of Riven's business. But then the woman's hood fell back, and Riven saw her face. She was old, maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back in a severe braid and eyes that burned with an intensity that didn't match her trembling hands. There was blood on her sleeve. Fresh blood. "Please," the woman said, and the word came out like broken glass. "I have done nothing wrong. Let me pass." The largest of the 5 soldiers laughed. "Nothing wrong? You fled the palace, my lady. That's treason." "I fled a trap," the woman shot back. "And you know it, Captain Dren. You were part of it." The soldier's smile died. "Careful with that tongue. Won't matter what you say when you're buried in the morning." He raised his sword. Riven moved without thinking. Her father had taught her to fight the same way he'd taught her to forge, with precision, economy, and absolutely no wasted motion. Fighting wasn't about strength. It was about leverage, timing, and understanding that everybody, no matter how big, had weak points. She crossed the alley in 4 strides and drove her boot into the back of the nearest soldier's knee. He went down hard, his sword clattering across the stones. Riven caught it before it stopped spinning and brought the pommel up into the jaw of the second soldier as he turned. Bone cracked. He dropped. 2 down. 3 to go. "Who the hell?" Captain Dren began, then stopped when he got a good look at her. Riven knew what he saw. A woman just past 20, lean and scarred, with dark hair cropped short and eyes that had seen too much. She wore a smith's leather apron over worn trousers, and a shirt that had been patched so many times it was more thread than fabric. Her hands were calloused, her knuckles scarred, and the sword she held looked perfectly natural in her grip. She looked like exactly what she was, someone who'd learned to fight because the world didn't give women any other choice. "Walk away," Riven said quietly. "All of you, now." Captain Dren's face twisted with contempt. "You're joking. You think one slum rat with a stolen sword is going to—" Riven threw the sword. It wasn't a smart throw or a particularly skilled one, but it didn't need to be. The blade tumbled end over end and struck Dren in the shoulder, hilt first, because Riven wasn't trying to kill him. Not yet. The impact knocked him back 2 steps, and in that moment of shock, Riven lunged forward and drove her fist into the third soldier's throat. He gagged and stumbled backward, clawing at his neck. 3 down. The 4th soldier was smarter than his friends. He didn't charge. He circled, sword up, watching her with the wary eyes of someone who'd actually been trained to fight. "You're good," he admitted, "but you're alone, and there's 2 of us." He was right. Riven was breathing hard now, her knuckles aching. The soldier she'd kicked was already getting to his feet, murder in his eyes. Captain Dren was pulling himself upright, one hand pressed to his shoulder. 3 against 1. Bad odds, but Riven had survived worse. "Last chance," she said. "Leave." Dren spat blood. "Kill her!" They came at her together. The first soldier feinted left and struck right, a decent trick that would have worked on someone with less experience. Riven had seen that move 100 times in the street fights that kept her forge stocked with coin. She dropped low, let his blade whistle over her head, and swept his legs out from under him. He hit the cobblestones hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. But she'd turned her back on Dren, and that was a mistake. His sword caught her across the ribs, not a deep cut, but enough to send fire screaming through her side. Riven gasped and stumbled, black spots dancing in her vision. Dren raised his blade for a killing stroke. "No!" The woman Riven had been trying to save threw herself forward, slamming into Dren with surprising strength. It wasn't enough to hurt him, but it was enough to break his focus, to give Riven the half-second she needed to move. She grabbed a fistful of loose cobblestone. Thornmarch's streets were falling apart, one more thing the king didn't care enough to fix, and hurled it into Dren's face. He screamed and reeled backward, hands flying to his eyes. Riven grabbed the woman's wrist. "Run!" They ran. Behind them she heard Dren shouting orders, heard boots pounding on stone, but the slums were Riven's territory. She knew every shortcut, every broken fence, every place where the shadows grew thick enough to swallow 2 running women. She led the older woman through a gap in a crumbling wall, across a courtyard that reeked of sewage, and finally into the narrow space between 2 tenement buildings where the moonlight couldn't reach. They pressed themselves against the wall and waited. Footsteps. Angry voices. A sword striking stone. Then, slowly, silence. Riven's side was on fire. When she pressed her hand to her ribs, it came away wet with blood. Not much. The leather apron had taken most of the blow, but enough to remind her that she'd just made a very stupid decision. "Thank you," the woman whispered. Her voice was steadier now, but her hands were still shaking. "Thank you. They would have killed me." "They still might," Riven said flatly. "Those were royal guards. You said something about the palace?" The woman nodded slowly. She was studying Riven's face in the darkness, her expression unreadable. "I need to get somewhere safe, somewhere they won't look for me. That's not my problem." "Please." The woman reached out and gripped Riven's arm with surprising strength. "I will pay you, whatever you ask, but I need your help." Riven should have said no, should have walked away and let this rich woman solve her own rich woman problems. Getting involved with palace politics was a death sentence for someone like her, someone with no name, no family, no protection. But there was something in the woman's eyes that Riven recognized. It was the same thing she saw in her own reflection every morning, desperation held together by sheer stubborn will. And maybe, just maybe, Riven was tired of being invisible. "Fine," she said, "but we do this my way. You don't ask questions, you don't slow me down, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" The woman nodded. "Understood? Good. Follow me." Riven led her deeper into the slums, away from the main streets and the watchful eyes of the city guard. They moved through a maze of back alleys and forgotten courtyards, places where the king's law had never reached and never would. Finally, they arrived at Riven's forge. It wasn't much. A squat stone building with a cracked chimney and a door that hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, the air smelled of coal smoke and hot metal, familiar scents that steadied Riven's racing heart. She lit a lamp and barred the door, then turned to get her first good look at the woman she'd saved. Up close, the woman was striking. Her face was lined with age, but still beautiful, with high cheekbones and a regal bearing that spoke of breeding and power. The blood on her sleeve had dried to a dark crust, and there was a bruise forming along her jaw. "Sit," Riven said, gesturing to a stool near the cold forge. "Let me see that arm." The woman obeyed, wincing as she pushed back her sleeve to reveal a shallow cut across her forearm. Not deep, but it needed cleaning. Riven fetched water and clean cloth, her movements efficient and practiced. She'd stitched enough of her own wounds to know what she was doing. "What's your name?" the woman asked as Riven worked. "Riven Ashford." "Riven?" the woman repeated as if testing the weight of it. "That's a strong name, a fighter's name." "I'm a blacksmith," Riven said curtly. "Fighting just keeps me alive long enough to work the forge." "You fight very well for someone who's just a blacksmith." Riven didn't answer. She finished cleaning the wound and bound it with quick, neat movements, then stepped back. "Your turn. Who are you, and why were royal guards trying to kill you?" The woman was silent for a long moment, her gaze distant. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with exhaustion. "My name is Seraphine Valcrest, and I was the mother of the Alpha King." Riven's hands stilled. She stared at the woman, searching for signs of madness or lies, but found only grim truth. The Alpha King, Kyle Valcrest. The most feared ruler in 3 generations, a man who'd unified the fractured territories through a combination of brilliant strategy and ruthless violence. They said he could kill a man with his bare hands. They said his enemies' bones decorated the throne room walls. They said he had no weaknesses. And this woman claimed to be his mother. "That's impossible," Riven said slowly. "The king's mother died 5 years ago. There was a state funeral. I saw the procession." "You saw a coffin," Seraphine corrected. "What was inside it, I cannot say. But it was not me." "Then where have you been?" "Hidden. Protected." Seraphine's expression darkened. "Or so I thought. 3 months ago, I began to suspect that someone within the palace guard was working against my son. Small things at first, missing reports, guards stationed in unusual locations, whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. You could have told the king. I had no proof, only suspicions." Seraphine shook her head. "And Kyle, my son is a brilliant leader, but he trusts his inner circle absolutely. If I had accused his own guards without evidence, it would have created division at a time when the kingdom can afford no weakness." "So you ran." "I fled," Seraphine corrected. 2 days ago, I overheard Captain Dren speaking with someone I could not see. They were planning something, an attack, an assassination. I couldn't hear clearly, but they mentioned my son's name, and they mentioned removing obstacles." She touched the bruise on her jaw gently. "That night, I left the palace through the servants' entrance. I thought I had been careful, but they found me. I've been running ever since." Riven absorbed this in silence. If Seraphine was telling the truth, and the desperation in her eyes suggested she was, then the Alpha King's own guards were plotting against him. It was the kind of political poison that brought down kingdoms. And Riven had just put herself directly in the middle of it. "You need to get word to your son," she said. "Warn him." "I can't," Seraphine's voice cracked. "Don't you see? If I contact him, the traitors will know I survived. They'll move up their timeline, strike before Kael can prepare. I need time to gather proof, to identify everyone involved." "And you think hiding in a slum forge is going to help with that?" "I think," Seraphine said carefully, "that I need someone brave enough and skilled enough to keep me alive while I work. Someone who isn't part of the palace, who has no loyalty to the guard, who can't be bought or threatened." She met Riven's eyes. "Someone like you." Riven laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You picked the wrong hero, lady. I'm nobody. The guild won't even let me join because I'm a woman. The city guard arrested me for defending myself. I'm not some noble knight or legendary warrior. I'm just trying to survive." "You saved my life." "I made a stupid mistake." "You stepped into an alley where 5 armed soldiers were about to commit murder, and you fought them off with nothing but your fists and your courage." Seraphine leaned forward, her voice intense. "That's not a mistake. That's who you are." Riven wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Because some small, reckless part of her wanted to believe it. Wanted to believe she was more than the scared girl the guild masters mocked, more than the invisible smith the city ignored. Wanted to believe she mattered. "If I help you," she said slowly, "and we get caught, they'll kill both of us." Slowly. "Yes." "And you have no proof of this conspiracy, no evidence, just your word against a captain of the guard." "Yes." "And you're asking me to risk my life, my forge, everything I have, on the chance that we can expose these traitors before they kill your son." Seraphine smiled, a small, sad expression. "When you put it that way, it does sound rather foolish, doesn't it?" Riven should have said no. Should have thrown this woman out and pretended none of this had ever happened. Should have gone back to her small, suffocating, safe life. Instead, she found herself saying, "How long do you need?" "A week. Maybe less, if I can make contact with someone I trust inside the palace." "And what do you need from me?" "Shelter, protection, and your silence." Seraphine's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. "No one can know I'm alive. Not yet. Can you give me that?" Riven looked around her forge, at the tools her father had left her, at the half-finished blades waiting on the workbench, at the life she'd built from nothing but stubbornness and skill. Then she looked at Seraphine Valcrest, mother of the Alpha King, and saw something she recognized, a woman the world had tried to bury who refused to stay down. "1 week," Riven said. "After that, you're on your own." Seraphine's smile was like sunrise. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." Over the next 3 days, Riven learned that keeping a queen hidden was significantly harder than forging a sword. Seraphine couldn't leave the forge, too much risk of being spotted, which meant Riven had to handle all her commissions while also keeping watch for any sign of royal guards searching the slums. She slept in 2-hour shifts, a hammer under her pillow, and one eye always on the door. The work kept her hands busy, but her mind raced. Every footstep outside made her reach for a weapon. Every shadow seemed to hide a soldier's blade. On the 4th day, a stranger entered her forge. He was tall, nearly 6.5 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun and eyes the color of winter steel. He wore a traveler's cloak that hid most of his features, but Riven could see the quality of the leather beneath. Expensive, military grade, made for someone who expected to fight. "I need a blade," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel grinding under a boot. Riven forced herself to stay calm. "What kind?" "A long sword, balanced for speed, not power, and I need it sharp enough to cut silk." Riven raised an eyebrow. "That's a very specific request." "I have very specific needs." There was something about the way he stood, perfectly balanced, weight-centered, hands loose at his sides, that told Riven this man knew how to kill. She'd seen enough fighters to recognize one when he walked through her door. She should have sent him away. Should have claimed she was too busy, recommended another smith. Instead, she heard herself saying, 2 weeks. Pay half up front. The man smiled, just a slight curve of his lips, and pulled a purse from his belt. Gold coins spilled across her workbench, more money than Riven usually saw in a month. 1 week, he countered. I'll pay double your rate if you can finish it in 1 week. Riven's pride flared. I don't rush quality work. I'm not asking you to rush. I'm asking you to show me what you're capable of. He said it like a challenge, and Riven had never been good at backing down from challenges. Fine. 1 week. But I'll need measurements. The man removed his cloak. Underneath, he wore the simple tunic and trousers of a traveling merchant, but his body told a different story. His arms were roped with muscle, his hands scarred from old fights, and across his chest, barely visible beneath the shirt, Riven could see the edge of what looked like a massive scar. This was no merchant. Who are you? She asked quietly. Someone who needs a good sword. He met her eyes, and for a moment Riven felt like he was looking straight through her, seeing every secret she'd ever kept. Does my name matter? I suppose not. She took his measurements in silence, her hands professional and steady despite the warning bells ringing in her head. When she finished, the man pulled his cloak back on and moved toward the door. 1 week, he said. I'll return then. Wait. Riven didn't know why she called after him, but something made her ask, What's your name, in case I need to reach you? The man paused in the doorway, his face half-shadowed. Kyle. Call me Kyle. Then he was gone. Riven stood frozen, her heart pounding. Kyle. Kyle Valcrest. The Alpha King had just walked into her forge, ordered a custom blade, and she'd been too blind to see it. She turned to find Seraphine standing in the doorway to the back room, her face pale. That was him, the older woman whispered. That was my son, Morset. For the next 2 days, Riven worked on the sword like a woman possessed. She knew, intellectually, that there was no way the man calling himself Kyle was actually the Alpha King. It was coincidence, nothing more. Kyle was a common enough name in the Northern Territories, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was moving around her, pieces of a game she didn't understand falling into place. Seraphine refused to contact her son. Not yet, she kept saying, not until I have proof. So Riven forged. She poured everything she knew into that blade, every technique her father had taught her, every trick she'd learned through 6 years of struggling to survive in a trade that didn't want her. The steel sang under her hammer, folding and refolding until it was strong enough to cut bone and flexible enough to bend without breaking. It was, without question, the finest weapon she'd ever made. On the 7th day, Kyle returned. He entered the forge just after dawn, when the light was still soft and uncertain. Riven had been awake all night putting the final edge on the blade, and her hands shook with exhaustion as she presented it to him. Kyle took the sword and tested its weight, moving through a series of forms so precise and deadly that Riven felt her breath catch. This was a man who'd been trained by masters, who'd spent his entire life learning how to kill. It's perfect, he said finally. Of course it is, Riven replied, too tired for false modesty. Kyle laughed, a real laugh, warm and unexpected. You're confident. I like that. I'm good at what I do. Yes, you are. He sheathed the sword and studied her face. The guild rejected your application. It wasn't a question. Riven stiffened. How did you know? I asked around. People remember you, the woman who broke 4 dock workers' bones and walked away smiling. I wasn't smiling. No, Kyle agreed, but you should have been. They deserved worse. There was something fierce in his voice, a rage that matched her own. Riven found herself staring at him, really looking for the first time. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and scars that spoke of battles won and lost. His eyes held a weight she recognized, the exhaustion of someone who carried too much responsibility and couldn't afford to set it down. Why do you care about the guild? She asked. Because they're fools, Kyle said bluntly. They look at you and see a woman. I look at you and see the finest smith in Thornmarch. Riven's throat tightened. No one had ever said that to her. Not her father, not the merchants who bought her work, not anyone. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me. Just keep making swords like this. He hesitated, then added, I'll be in the city for a few more days. May I return? I find your company refreshing. Every instinct screamed at Riven to say no. This man was dangerous, possibly the most dangerous person in the kingdom. Getting close to him was asking for trouble. But she heard herself saying, "Come back tomorrow. I'll have tea ready." Kyle smiled, a real smile this time, one that transformed his harsh features into something almost gentle. Tomorrow, then. After he left, Riven leaned against her workbench and tried to calm her racing heart. Seraphine emerged from the back room, her expression unreadable. "You're playing a dangerous game, Riven Ashford." "I know. He doesn't recognize me yet. The years have changed me, and he thinks I'm dead. But eventually, he will." "I know," Riven said again. "And when he does, when he learns I've been hiding here, that you've been sheltering me, he'll want answers." Riven met the older woman's eyes. "Then we'd better find proof of that conspiracy before he asks the questions." Seraphine's smile was fierce and proud. "My son chose his sword maker well." Kale returned the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. He never explained why he kept coming back, and Riven never asked. They fell into an easy rhythm. She would work at the forge while he watched, asking occasional questions about her technique, and when the afternoon grew hot, they would sit together and drink tea that was always too strong and talk about everything except who they really were. Riven learned that Kyle had no patience for politics, that he'd rather fight a battle than attend a council meeting, that he carried the weight of his crown like a man wearing a yoke of iron. And Kyle learned that Riven had built her entire life on stubborn refusal to quit, that she saw the world in clean lines of right and wrong, that she'd rather starve than compromise her craft. They were, Riven realized with growing unease, becoming friends. On the 8th day, everything changed. Seraphine had gone out at dawn, against Riven's protests, to meet a contact she claimed could provide information about the conspiracy. She'd promised to return before noon. By sunset, she still hadn't come back. Riven was pacing the forge like a caged wolf when Kyle arrived for his daily visit. He took one look at her face and his expression went cold and sharp. "What's wrong?" Riven almost told him, almost confessed everything, who Seraphine was, why she was hiding, the conspiracy that threatened to tear the kingdom apart. But she'd made a promise to keep Seraphine's presence secret, and Riven kept her promises. "Nothing," she lied, "just a difficult commission." Kale didn't believe her. She could see it in the way his eyes narrowed, the slight tension in his shoulders. "You're lying," he said quietly. "Why?" "I can't tell you. Can't or won't." "Does it matter?" They stared at each other across the forge, and for the first time since they'd met, the easy companionship between them cracked. "Yes," Kyle said finally. "It matters. Because I thought we were building something here. Trust, maybe. Or at least honesty." "We are," Riven said desperately. "But there are some things I—" The door burst open. Seraphine stumbled in, her face bruised and bleeding, her fine clothes torn. Behind her, Riven could hear shouting, guards getting closer. "They found me," Seraphine gasped. "They know I'm here. We have to—" She stopped mid-sentence as her eyes landed on Kyle, and Kale, in turn, went absolutely still. "Mother?" he whispered. The word hung in the air like a blade. Seraphine's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Kyle, my son, I'm so sorry. Outside, the shouting grew louder, boots on cobblestones, swords being drawn. Kyle's face transformed from shock to understanding to cold, lethal fury in the space of a heartbeat. He turned to Riven, and his voice was the voice of a king, absolute and merciless. "How long has she been here?" 8 days, Riven said. There was no point in lying now. "And you knew who she was?" "Yes." "And you didn't tell me." "She asked me not to." Kyle's jaw clenched so hard Riven heard his teeth grind. But before he could speak, the forge door exploded inward, and Captain Dren stepped through, flanked by a dozen armed guards. "Your Majesty," Dren said with mock courtesy. "How fortunate to find you here. We've been searching for your dear mother, thought she died years ago, but it seems rumors of her death were greatly exaggerated." Kale's hand went to the sword Riven had made him. "Stand down, Captain. That's an order." I'm afraid I can't do that, sire. Dren's smile was cruel. You see, we have orders of our own, from people who have grown tired of your particular style of leadership. Treason, Kael breathed. Pragmatism. Dren gestured, and his guards fanned out, surrounding them. The kingdom needs a new direction, a stronger hand. Your mother's sudden reappearance is rather inconvenient for our timeline, but we can still salvage this. You'll both die here, along with this foolish blacksmith who sheltered a traitor, and the kingdom will move forward under more suitable leadership. Riven's hand closed around a hammer. 12 guards, 3 civilians, terrible odds, but she'd survived worse. Riven, Kael said quietly. His voice was steady, controlled. Can you fight? Yes. Good. He drew the sword she'd made, and it sang as it left the sheath. Stay close to my mother. Keep her safe. What about you? Kael's smile was all teeth and violence. I'm the Alpha King. Let me remind these men why that title scares them. And then the slum's forge erupted into chaos and blood. Kael moved like lightning wrapped in flesh. The first guard didn't even see the blade coming. One moment he was raising his sword, the next he was on the ground clutching a shoulder that would never lift a weapon again. Kael didn't kill, not yet, but every strike was surgical, precise, designed to disable and terrify. Riven had seen fighters before. Street brawlers, trained soldiers, even a few mercenaries who'd wandered through Thorn March looking for work. None of them moved like this. Kael fought the way Riven forged, with absolute economy of motion, no wasted energy, every action serving a purpose. He was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. But 12 against 1 were still 12 against 1, and even the Alpha King couldn't hold those odds forever. Riven! Seraphine's voice cut through the chaos. The back door! Riven grabbed the older woman's arm and pulled her toward the rear of the forge, where a narrow door led to the alley behind. Her father had installed it years ago as an escape route, in case creditors came calling. She'd never imagined she'd use it to flee from royal guards. Behind them, steel rang against steel. A man screamed. Captain Dren was shouting orders, his voice shrill with rage. Riven shoved the door open and pulled Seraphine through, and came face to face with 3 more guards waiting in the alley. Going somewhere? One of them asked, grinning. Riven didn't hesitate. She swung the hammer she'd grabbed from her workbench and caught the closest guard across the temple. He dropped like a stone. The second guard lunged, sword extended, and Riven twisted sideways, feeling the blade whisper past her ribs close enough to kiss skin. She brought the hammer up into his chin. Bone cracked. He staggered backward, blood pouring from his mouth. The third guard was smarter. He didn't attack. He grabbed Seraphine. Drop the weapon or the old woman dies, he said, pressing his blade to Seraphine's throat. Riven froze. The hammer suddenly felt impossibly heavy in her hand. Do it, the guard barked. A thin line of red appeared where his sword touched Seraphine's skin. Riven's mind raced. She could throw the hammer, she was fast enough, strong enough, but if she missed, if her aim was off by even an inch, Seraphine would die. And all of this, every risk she'd taken, every promise she'd made, would be for nothing. The guard's grin widened. That's right, nice and slow. Put it down and maybe I'll make this quick. Seraphine drove her elbow backward into the guard's ribs with shocking force. The man grunted, his grip loosening for just a fraction of a second, and Seraphine twisted free with the grace of someone half her age. Riven threw the hammer. It struck the guard square in the chest, stealing his breath and sending him crashing into the alley wall. Before he could recover, Riven was on him, her knee driving into his stomach, her fist connecting with his jaw once, twice, 3 times, until his eyes rolled back and he went limp. She stood, breathing hard, and turned to find Seraphine watching her with an expression somewhere between admiration and concern. You fight like you have nothing to lose, the older woman said quietly. I don't, Riven replied. Not anymore. They ran. Behind them, Riven heard the sounds of battle intensifying. Part of her wanted to go back, to help Kael, but Seraphine grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. He can handle himself, she said. Right now we need to survive. They fled deeper into the slums, through streets that stank of sewage and despair. Riven's side was screaming where Dren's sword had caught her 8 days ago. The wound had never fully healed, and now it felt like fire spreading through her ribs with every breath. But she didn't slow down. They reached a safe house Riven knew, an abandoned tannery that no one had used in 5 years, and barricaded themselves inside. The building smelled of old leather and rot, but the walls were thick and the door was solid oak. Seraphine collapsed onto a pile of moth-eaten canvas, her face pale. The cut on her throat was shallow, but still bleeding, and her hands were shaking badly. "Let me see," Riven said, kneeling beside her. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding. Let me see." Seraphine allowed Riven to examine the wound. It wasn't deep, just a scratch really, but it could have been so much worse. An inch to the left, and the guard's blade would have opened her throat. Riven cleaned and bound the cut with strips torn from her shirt, her hands steady despite the adrenaline still singing through her blood. When she finished, she sat back and finally let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. The Alpha King knew his mother was alive. The royal guards had turned traitor, and Riven had just become the most wanted woman in Thornmarch. "I'm sorry," Seraphine said quietly. "I should never have involved you in this. You saved my life, and I've repaid you by destroying yours." "My life was already destroyed," Riven said, surprising herself with the bitterness in her voice. "The guild rejected me. The city ignores me. I forge the finest blades in 3 territories, and no one will put my name on them because I'm a woman. At least now I'm being hunted for something that matters." "That's a very dark way of looking at it." "It's an honest way." Seraphine studied her for a long moment, those sharp eyes seeing far too much. "My son likes you." Riven felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He doesn't know me." "He knows enough. I saw the way he looked at you when he thought you were lying to him. That wasn't just anger, that was betrayal. You can only betray someone you've let close." "He'll hate me now," Riven said flatly. "I kept you hidden from him. I lied to his face." "Perhaps. Or perhaps he'll understand why you did it." Seraphine's smile was sad. Kael has lived his entire life surrounded by people who want something from him. Power, favor, protection. You asked him for nothing. You just saw him. As a man, not a king. That's rare. Precious, even. Riven didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They sat in silence as the light outside faded to dusk and then to full dark. Riven's body ached in a dozen places, her mind replaying the fight in the forge over and over, searching for mistakes, for better choices. She should have moved faster, should have seen Dren's men in the alley, should have protected Seraphine better, should have told Kael the truth from the beginning. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "Now." Seraphine's expression hardened. "Now we finish what I started. We find proof of the conspiracy, we expose the traitors, and we save my son's kingdom. The guards will be searching for us. We can't hide forever." "No," Seraphine agreed, "we can't, which is why we're not going to hide." She stood, wincing slightly, and moved to the window. Outside, Thornmarch sprawled in all its broken glory, a city of desperate people living desperate lives, ignored by the kingdom they were supposed to serve. "The conspiracy didn't start with Dren," Seraphine said. "He's just a captain. Someone higher gave him orders, someone with real power." "Who?" "I don't know yet, but I know where to find answers." She turned to face Riven. "There's a man in the merchant quarter named Aldrich Voss. He's an information broker, buys and sells secrets to anyone with enough coin. If there's a plot against the king, Voss will know about it." "And you think he'll just tell us?" "I think he'll tell us if we ask the right way." Seraphine's smile was sharp. "Voss is a coward at heart. He responds well to motivation." Riven understood what she was suggesting. "You want to threaten him." "I want to convince him that helping us is safer than refusing us. There's a difference." "Not much of one." "Perhaps, but we're out of options and running out of time." Seraphine crossed her arms. "Can you do it? Can you be frightening when you need to be?" Riven thought about the dock workers she'd broken, the guard she'd fought in the alley, the hammer still clutched in her hand, its head dark with other men's blood. "Yes," she said, "I can be frightening." They waited until midnight when the city watch would be at their laziest, then made their way toward the merchant quarter. Riven had dressed in darker clothes and bound her hair back tight against her skull. Without her smith's apron, she looked like any other slum dweller, lean, hard, and dangerous. The merchant quarter was a different world from the slums. Here, the streets were paved and clean, the buildings painted and maintained. Lamplight spilled from windows where wealthy families ate dinner and discussed politics without worrying whether they'd survive the night. Riven hated it on principle. Aldrich Voss lived above a spice merchant shop in a building that smelled of cinnamon and cloves. They climbed the stairs in silence, their footsteps muffled by expensive carpet, and stopped outside a door marked with a brass nameplate that read, A. Voss, Consultant. Seraphine knocked. 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. Some kind of signal. The door opened a crack, revealing a thin face with nervous eyes. "We're closed," the man began, then stopped as he got a good look at Seraphine. You're supposed to be dead?" Seraphine finished. "Yes, I've heard. May we come in, Aldrich? We have business to discuss." Voss tried to slam the door. Riven caught it with her boot and shoved hard, sending the information broker stumbling backward into his apartment. They stepped inside and closed the door behind them. Voss's home was exactly what Riven expected. Expensive furniture arranged with no taste, artwork bought for status rather than beauty, and shelves upon shelves of ledgers and documents. This was a man who dealt in information the way Riven dealt in steel, as a commodity to be bought and sold. Voss scrambled backward until he hit his desk. "I don't know anything. Whatever you think Relax, Aldrich," Seraphine said calmly. "We're not here to hurt you. We're here to make a deal." "I don't make deals with dead women." "Then it's fortunate I'm very much alive." Seraphine settled into a chair with the ease of someone who'd grown up in palaces. "Tell me about the plot against my son." Voss's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." Riven stepped forward. She didn't threaten, didn't raise her voice. She just loomed. She'd learned years ago that sometimes the most frightening thing you could do was simply stand very still and let someone's imagination do the work. "Perhaps I wasn't clear," Seraphine continued. "There is a conspiracy within the royal guard. Captain Dren is involved, but he's not the leader. I want to know who is. I want names, positions, and plans. And you're going to give them to me. And if I refuse," Seraphine gestured to Riven, "then my friend here will demonstrate why threatening information brokers is such a profitable career path." Riven cracked her knuckles. The sound was very loud in the quiet room. Voss licked his lips. "If I tell you, they'll kill me. If you don't tell us, I'll kill you," Riven said quietly. It was the first time she'd spoken since entering the apartment, and her voice seemed to hit Voss like a physical blow. "I've killed men tonight. Good men who were just following orders. You think I'll hesitate over a rat who profits from other people's suffering?" It was a bluff. Riven hadn't actually killed anyone, just hurt them badly. But Voss didn't know that. He broke. "Chancellor Mordrin," he gasped. "He's the one behind it. He wants to replace the king with someone more manageable." Seraphine's expression went cold. "Willem Mordrin? My son's chief advisor?" "The same. He's been building support among the noble houses for months. Promises of lower taxes, more autonomy, less centralized power. The king's military reforms have made him enemies among the old guard, and Mordrin is exploiting that." "And the assassination attempt?" "Was supposed to happen during the spring festival, 3 weeks from now. Public execution disguised as a terrorist attack. The king dies, Mordrin steps in to stabilize the situation, and a puppet ruler takes the throne." Voss was talking faster now, desperate to get the words out. "But then you disappeared and they thought you might warn the king, so they moved up the timeline. Dren was supposed to kill you quietly and report that you died of natural causes." "But I escaped," Seraphine finished, "and now their careful plan is falling apart." "They're panicking," Voss confirmed. "Half the guard is looking for you. The other half is trying to figure out how to salvage the coup. Mordrin is furious." Riven felt ice settle in her stomach. "What about the king? Is he safe?" Voss hesitated. "I don't know. Last I heard, he was still at your forge dealing with Dren's men, but Mordrin has soldiers loyal to him throughout the palace. If the king returns there without knowing who to trust—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Seraphine stood abruptly. We need to warn Kyle, now. How? Riven demanded. We can't just walk into the palace. We'll be arrested, or worse, the moment we're spotted. Then we don't walk in. We find another way. Seraphine turned to Voss. The palace has service tunnels, yes? For servants and supplies? Voss nodded reluctantly. Yes, but they're guarded. By Mordrin's men or the king's? I don't know. Seraphine leaned forward, her voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. Then I suggest you find out. Quickly. Voss practically ran to his desk and began pulling out ledgers, his hands shaking so badly he could barely turn the pages. Riven watched him work and felt a strange mixture of contempt and pity. This was what happened to people who lived by information instead of conviction. They became hollow, adaptable, loyal to nothing except their own survival. She would rather die than become that. Here, Voss said finally, pointing to a page covered in cramped handwriting. The East Service Tunnel. It's staffed by old royal guards, men who served before Mordrin's influence spread. They're loyal to the crown, not to the chancellor. Are you certain? Seraphine asked. As certain as I can be about anything in this cursed city. Seraphine studied the ledger for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. If this information proves false, Aldrich, I will return. And next time, I won't bring my merciful companion. Riven almost smiled at being called merciful, but she kept her expression hard. They left Voss trembling in his expensive apartment and made their way back into the night. The palace sat on a hill overlooking Thornmarch like a crown of stone, all towers and walls and ancient strength. Riven had never been inside. People like her didn't get palace invitations, but she'd seen it often enough from the slums, a reminder of the distance between her world and the world of power. Tonight, she would cross that distance. The East Service Tunnel entrance was hidden behind a baker's shop that had closed hours ago. Seraphine picked the lock with practiced ease. Apparently being the king's mother came with unusual skills, and they slipped inside. The tunnel was narrow and dark, lit by torches spaced too far apart. It smelled of damp stone and old bread, and every sound echoed in the enclosed space. Riven kept one hand on the knife at her belt, her senses straining for any hint of danger. They'd gone perhaps 50 yards when they heard voices ahead. Seraphine grabbed Riven's arm and pulled her into a shallow alcove. They pressed themselves against the wall and waited. 2 guards emerged from the darkness, talking in low voices. Don't like it, one was saying. The king's been gone all day. No one knows where he is. Probably off brooding somewhere, the other replied. You know how he gets. This feels different. And did you hear about the commotion in the slums? Something about the king's mother? The second guard snorted. She's been dead for 5 years, Garrett. Someone's spreading rumors. Maybe. But Chancellor Mordrin's been acting strange. Called an emergency council meeting for tomorrow at dawn. Something's happening. They passed within 3 feet of the alcove where Riven and Seraphine were hiding, close enough that Riven could have reached out and touched them. She held her breath, every muscle tensed. The guards moved on, their voices fading into the distance. Seraphine let out a slow breath. Garrett, she murmured. I know him. He served my husband before he served Kyle. He's loyal. Can we trust him? We may have to. Seraphine stepped out of the alcove. Come, we're running out of time. They continued deeper into the tunnel, moving as quickly as they dared. Riven's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Every shadow seemed to hide enemies. Every sound could be betrayal. The tunnel eventually opened into a storage chamber filled with sacks of grain and barrels of wine. On the far side, a stone staircase led upward into the palace proper. They'd made it. Seraphine started toward the stairs, then froze. Chancellor Willem Mordrin stepped out of the shadows, flanked by 6 armed guards. He was older than Riven expected, maybe 50, with iron-gray hair and the kind of face that looked trustworthy even when it was smiling at your execution. He wore expensive robes and carried no weapon, but he didn't need one. The guards with him had enough steel for an army. Lady Seraphine, Mordrin said pleasantly, what a delightful surprise. We've been searching for you everywhere. Seraphine's hand went to the small knife hidden in her sleeve. Willem, still playing the loyal servant, I see. Always, though I must say, your return from the dead does complicate things. Mordrin's eyes shifted to Riven. And you must be the blacksmith, the woman foolish enough to shelter a traitor and lie to her king. I'm impressed. Most people aren't that stupid. Most people aren't that brave, Seraphine corrected coldly. Brave. Stupid. The line is often unclear. Mordrin gestured and the guards spread out, cutting off any escape route. Here's what's going to happen. You're both going to come with me quietly. You'll be tried for conspiracy against the crown, ironic, I know, and executed tomorrow morning. The king will be devastated, of course, but he'll have me to lean on during his grief. And in a few weeks, when the spring festival arrives, there will be another tragedy. Such is the burden of leadership. Riven's hand tightened on her knife. 6 guards. 2 exhausted women. Impossible odds. But she'd survived impossible before. We're not going anywhere with you, she said. Mordrin sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. Very well. Kill the blacksmith, but take Lady Seraphine alive. The king will want to see his mother's corpse before we bury her again. The guards advanced. Riven threw her knife. It wasn't a great throw. She was a smith, not an assassin. But it was fast enough and desperate enough to catch the nearest guard in the shoulder. He cried out and stumbled, creating a gap in their formation. Riven grabbed Seraphine and ran. Not toward the stairs, that way was blocked, but back into the tunnel, deeper into the maze of service passages that honeycombed the palace foundations. Behind them, she heard Mordrin shouting orders, heard boots pounding on stone. They ran blind, taking turns at random, desperate to lose their pursuers in the darkness. Riven's lungs burned. Her wounded side screamed with every step, but she didn't slow down. They burst through a doorway and into a wider corridor, one actually meant for human traffic rather than rats and servants. Torches blazed in wall sconces, and the floor was polished marble instead of rough stone. They'd reached the palace proper. This way, Seraphine gasped, pulling Riven to the left. Kael's chambers are in the north tower. If we can reach them, halt! More guards appeared ahead, these ones wearing the king's colors rather than Mordrin's corruption. Riven felt a wild surge of hope. Maybe they could explain. Maybe these men would help. Then she saw the wanted posters they were holding, crude drawings of her face and Seraphine's, with words beneath that she couldn't read from this distance but could guess. Traitors, assassins, kill on sight. Mordrin had been busy. Please, Seraphine said, raising her hands. We need to speak to the king. It's urgent. The king's not here, one of the guards said. His hand was on his sword, but he hadn't drawn it yet. And you're both under arrest for conspiracy and treason. We haven't conspired against anyone, Riven shouted. Chancellor Mordrin is the traitor. He's planning to kill the king during the spring festival. The guards exchanged glances. One of them looked uncertain. That's a serious accusation, he said slowly. It's the truth, Seraphine insisted. Please, just take us to someone loyal to my son. Someone who can verify our story. The uncertain guard was wavering. Riven could see it in his eyes, but the others were harder, colder. Our orders are clear, their leader said. You come with us, now. Behind them, Riven heard more footsteps. Mordrin's men getting closer. They were trapped. Seraphine met Riven's eyes, and in that look, Riven saw resignation. The older woman had fought as hard as she could, risked everything, and still lost. She was ready to surrender, ready to face whatever came next with dignity. Riven wasn't. She'd spent her entire life being told what she couldn't do. Couldn't be a smith, couldn't fight, couldn't matter. And every single time she'd proven them wrong through sheer stubborn refusal to quit. She wasn't going to quit now. I need you to trust me, she whispered to Seraphine. What are you? Riven grabbed one of the wall torches and hurled it at the guards. They scattered, yelling, and in that moment of chaos, Riven charged. She'd learned to fight in back alleys and desperate moments against opponents who were bigger, stronger, and better armed. The only advantage she'd ever had was willingness to do whatever it took to survive. She used that advantage now. The first guard was still recovering from dodging the torch when Riven hit him low and hard, driving her shoulder into his stomach and sending him crashing into his companions. They went down in a tangle of limbs and armor, and Riven didn't give them time to recover. She kicked the uncertain guard in the knee, not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to hurt, and grabbed his sword as he fell. The weapon was heavier than she liked, balanced for a larger fighter, but it would do. The guard captain lunged at her with his blade extended. Riven parried clumsily. She was a decent fighter, but no swordswoman, and felt the impact shudder up her arm. He was stronger, better trained, and wearing armor she couldn't penetrate, but he was also predictable. He came at her again with the same straight thrust, expecting her to retreat. Instead, Riven stepped inside his guard and slammed the pommel of her stolen sword into his face. His nose broke with a wet crunch and he staggered backward, blood streaming down his chin. Riven pressed her advantage. She couldn't outfence him, but she could overwhelm him with sheer aggressive fury. She struck again and again, forcing him back, giving him no time to think or plan. Finally, he slipped on blood, his own blood, and fell. Riven stood over him, breathing hard, the stolen sword trembling in her hands. The other guards had recovered and were climbing to their feet, fury and fear warring in their expressions. Mordred's men were entering the corridor from the other direction, trapping them between two forces. And then a voice like thunder echoed through the hall. "Enough!" Everyone froze. Kael Valkrest strode into the corridor with the presence of a storm given human form. He was bloodied and bruised, his fine clothes torn, but the sword Riven had made for him still gleamed in his hand. Behind him marched a dozen royal guards, the old guard, the loyal ones, with weapons drawn. The Alpha King had returned. He took in the scene with one sweeping glance. His mother cornered, Riven standing over fallen guards, Mordred's men advancing from both sides. And Riven saw the exact moment he made his choice. "Guards," he said quietly, "arrest Chancellor Mordred for high treason. Anyone who stands with him will share his fate." Mordred's face went pale. "Your Majesty, I can explain." "You can be silent," Kael interrupted, "or you can die where you stand. Choose quickly." Mordred chose silence. Kael's guards moved with brutal efficiency, disarming Mordred's men and binding them in chains. The uncertain guard who'd hesitated earlier helped his captain to his feet, both of them looking thoroughly confused about what had just happened. Finally, Kael turned to Seraphine and Riven. His expression was unreadable. "Mother," he said softly, "you have a great deal of explaining to do." Seraphine stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. I know, and I'm so sorry, Kael pulled her into a fierce embrace, cutting off her words. "You're alive," he murmured into her hair. "You're alive, and that's all that matters. We can discuss the rest later." Then he looked at Riven. She expected anger, expected accusations and betrayal and rage. Instead, she saw something that might have been respect. "You kept your promise to her," Kael said, "even when it cost you everything. Even when I was standing right in front of you, asking for the truth." Riven's throat was too tight to speak, so she just nodded. Kael's smile was small and sad. "We need to talk, all three of us. But first," he gestured to the chaos around them. "I have a kingdom to save." He was right. Mordred's arrest was just the beginning. There would be trials, executions, a complete purge of the guard. The conspiracy had roots that ran deep, and pulling them out would take time and blood. But as Riven stood there in the palace corridor surrounded by soldiers and secrets and the weight of history, she felt something she'd never felt before. She felt like she belonged. Not because anyone had given her permission or because she'd earned some official recognition, but because she'd made a choice to stand with people who mattered, to fight for something bigger than her own survival. The guildmasters could keep their approval. The city could keep its contempt. Riven Ashford had saved a queen and earned a king's respect. That was enough. That was enough, or so Riven thought, standing in that blood-stained corridor with the weight of the Alpha King's respect settling on her shoulders like armor she'd never asked to wear. She was wrong. The trials began 3 days later in the palace's grand hall, a cavernous space with vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows that cast fractured rainbows across the stone floor. Riven had never seen anything so beautiful or so coldly intimidating. This was where kings dispensed justice, where nobles schemed and plotted, where the fate of thousands could be decided with a single word. She didn't belong here, but Kael had insisted she stand beside him during the proceedings, along with Seraphine. "You exposed the conspiracy," he'd said when Riven protested. "You deserve to see it ended." deserve. As if Riven had ever gotten what she deserved. Chancellor Mordrin knelt in chains before the throne, his expensive robes replaced with prisoner's rags. His face was gray, his eyes hollow. Behind him stood 14 guards and 6 nobles, all implicated in the plot to overthrow the king. The evidence was overwhelming. Documents seized from Mordrin's chambers, testimony from Aldrich Voss, confessions extracted from guards who'd broken under questioning. It should have been simple. Execute the traitors, restore order, move forward. But nothing in Thornmarch was ever simple. The Grand Hall was packed with nobles from every major house in the kingdom, summoned by royal decree to witness justice. They filled the gallery like crows gathering for a feast, their expensive silks and carefully neutral expressions hiding calculations that ran deeper than Riven could fathom. She caught fragments of their whispered conversations as she took her place beside the throne. The blacksmith girl, can you believe? No breeding, no family, standing beside the king like, scandal, absolute scandal. Riven kept her face blank and her hands steady, but inside, familiar anger burned. These people with their titles and their bloodlines and their carefully inherited power, they looked at her and saw nothing but a slum rat who'd gotten lucky. Let them look. Let them whisper. She'd survived worse than their contempt. Kael ascended to the throne with the slow, deliberate movements of a man carrying an impossible burden. He looked older today, the weight of his crown more visible than Riven had ever seen it. Seraphine stood to his right, her presence a statement that needed no words. The king's mother lived, and those who'd tried to erase her would pay. Chancellor Willem Mordrin, Kael's voice filled the hall like a bell tolling for the dead. You stand accused of high treason, conspiracy to commit regicide, and attempted murder of a member of the royal family. How do you plead? Mordrin raised his head. For a moment, Riven expected him to beg for mercy, to grovel and weep and try to bargain for his worthless life. Instead, he smiled. Guilty, Your Majesty, of every charge, and proud of it. A ripple of shock ran through the assembled nobles. Even Kael looked surprised, his eyes narrowing. You're proud of betraying your king? He asked quietly. I'm proud of trying to save this kingdom from your arrogance, Mordrin shot back. His voice grew stronger, more confident, as if standing in chains had somehow freed him. You and your reforms, your grand plans to remake the realm. You think you're strengthening us, but you're destroying everything our ancestors built. I'm ending corruption and incompetence, Kael said coldly. If that's what our ancestors built, then it deserves to be destroyed. You're ending tradition, order, the natural hierarchy that kept this kingdom stable for 300 years. Mordrin's eyes blazed with zealot's fire. You've given power to merchants and common soldiers. You've elevated peasants to positions they were never meant to hold. And you've made enemies of every noble house that remembers what it means to have pride in their bloodline. Kael's hand tightened on the arm of his throne. So you decided to kill me. I decided to stop you before you dragged us all into chaos. Mordrin turned to address the gallery now, playing to his audience. Look at who he elevates. A blacksmith girl with no family, no training, no right to stand in this hall. She's a symbol of everything wrong with his rule. The idea that anyone can be anything, that birth and blood and breeding don't matter. He pointed at Riven with his chained hands. That creature fought royal guards. She sheltered a fugitive. She lied to her king's face. And instead of executing her, he's made her his companion. Tell me that isn't madness. Riven felt every eye in the hall turn toward her. The noble's whispers grew louder, more pointed. She wanted to shrink away, to disappear, to be anywhere but here. But Kael was watching her, his expression unreadable, and Seraphine had her hand on Riven's shoulder, a gesture of support that felt like an anchor keeping her from drowning. That creature, Kael said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, saved my mother's life. She fought when trained soldiers fled. She kept her promises when men with titles and honor broke theirs. And if elevating her is madness, then I'll gladly be called mad. The hall erupted. Nobles shouted over each other, some supporting the king, others condemning him. Ancient feuds and fresh alliances clashed like swords in the confined space. Riven heard someone call her a whore. Someone else called Kael a tyrant. The noise built and built until it felt like the walls would crack from the pressure. Kale rose from his throne, and the hall fell silent. "Enough," he said quietly. "I didn't summon you here to debate policy. I summoned you to witness justice." He descended the steps until he stood before Mordrin, looking down at the man who'd tried to end his life. "You will be executed at dawn," Kael said, "along with every guard and noble who joined your conspiracy. Your lands will be seized, your titles revoked, your names struck from the rolls of honor. And when people remember you, they'll remember you as the fools who thought they could stop progress with knives in the dark." Mordrin's smile never wavered. "Kill me then, but you can't kill what I represent. Half the nobles in this room agree with me. They're just too afraid to say it out loud." "Then let them speak," Kael challenged. "Let anyone who believes birth matters more than merit, who thinks the old ways are better than progress, stand now and declare themselves." Silence. Not a single noble moved. Mordrin's smile finally cracked. "Cowards," he spat. "All of you. You'll whisper in corners and scheme in shadows, but you won't stand for your beliefs. You deserve the kingdom you're going to get." Guards dragged him away, still shouting about bloodlines and tradition and the natural order of things. The other conspirators followed in silence, their faces masks of fear or resignation. Kael returned to his throne and dismissed the assembly with a wave of his hand. The nobles fled like rats from a burning building, eager to escape the king's presence and start spreading whatever version of events best suited their interests. When the hall was finally empty except for Kael, Seraphine, and Riven, the king slumped backward and pressed his hands to his face. "That could have gone better," he muttered. "It could have gone worse," Seraphine countered. "At least none of them openly supported Mordrin. Because they're smart enough to know I'd execute them too." Kael lowered his hands and looked at Riven. "Are you all right?" The question caught her off guard. "Me? I'm fine." "You're not fine. I saw your face when Mordrin called you a creature, when the nobles whispered about you." His expression softened. "I'm sorry. I should have warned you what walking into that hall would mean." "You think I can't handle insults?" Riven's laugh was bitter. "I've been called worse by better people than them." "That doesn't make it hurt less." "No," Riven admitted, "but I'm used to it hurting." Kael studied her for a long moment, and Riven had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing far more than she wanted to show. "Come with me," he said finally. "Both of you. There's something I need to discuss, and I'd rather do it somewhere that doesn't feel like a tomb." He led them through a maze of corridors and staircases until they reached a tower chamber Riven had never seen. It was smaller than the grand hall, but somehow more impressive. A circular room lined with windows that offered views of the entire city. Maps covered every surface, marked with notes and symbols that spoke of military campaigns and strategic planning. This was where the Alpha King made war. "Wine?" Kael offered, gesturing to a sideboard laden with bottles and glasses. "Please," Seraphine said. Riven just nodded. They settled into chairs arranged around a low table, and for a few minutes no one spoke. They just drank and breathed and let the tension of the trial drain away. Finally, Kael broke the silence. "Mordrin was right about one thing," he said quietly. "The nobles are terrified of what I'm trying to build. They see me elevating skilled people regardless of birth, and they know it threatens everything their power is based on." "Let them be terrified," Seraphine said. "Fear keeps them obedient." "Fear also breeds desperate men, and desperate men do desperate things." Kael set down his wine glass. "I need to make a statement. Something bold enough that the nobles understand I won't back down, but strategic enough that I don't push them into open rebellion." "What kind of statement?" Riven asked warily. Kael met her eyes. "I want to make you master of the royal forge." The words hung in the air like smoke. Riven was certain she'd misheard. "You want to what?" "The position has been vacant since old Henrik died last winter. I've been searching for someone skilled enough to fill it, someone who understands that a blade is more than just steel. It's a promise. Someone like you." "I'm not qualified," Riven said automatically. "I'm not even in the guild. I have no training, no credentials. You made this." Kael drew the sword she'd forged for him and laid it on the table between them. Even in the afternoon light, the blade seemed to glow with some inner fire. This is the finest weapon I've ever held. It's perfectly balanced, sharp enough to split silk, and strong enough to break through armor. Henrik himself couldn't have done better. That's one sword, Riven protested. The Royal Forge produces hundreds. Weapons for the entire army, ceremonial blades for state occasions, custom work for visiting dignitaries. I can't. You can, Kael interrupted. And you will. Because I need someone in that position who owes their loyalty to me, not to ancient traditions or noble families. Someone who understands what it means to be dismissed and underestimated and told you're not good enough. He leaned forward, his intensity almost frightening. You'll have a staff of 20 smiths under your command, a budget that would make merchants weep, and the authority to forge the weapons that will reshape this kingdom. Riven looked at Seraphine, desperate for the older woman to talk sense into her son. Instead, Seraphine smiled. It's a brilliant move, Kael. Mordrin claimed you elevate the unworthy? Prove him wrong by showing what the unworthy can accomplish when given a chance. It's political suicide, Riven said. The nobles already hate me. If you give me this position, they'll see it as a slap in the face. They'll unite against you. They're already united against me, Kael countered. At least this way, I get exceptional weapons out of the deal. I don't want to be a symbol. I don't want to be your statement to the nobility. I just want to make things and be left alone. I know. Kael's voice gentled. And if I could give you that quiet life, I would. But we're past the point where either of us gets what we want. Mordrin's conspiracy failed, but the sentiment behind it is still out there, festering. The nobles think they can wait me out, that eventually I'll compromise or make a mistake or die without an heir. He picked up his sword and tested its edge with his thumb. I need to show them that I'm not backing down, that every attack just makes me push harder. And yes, that means using you as a symbol, but it also means giving you real power, real authority to create change. Riven wanted to say no, wanted to walk away from the politics and the danger and the impossible expectations. She could go back to her forge in the slums, back to the small, suffocating life she'd built. But that forge was destroyed now, burned during the fight with Dren's men. And even if it weren't, could she really go back to being invisible after everything that had happened? Could she pretend she hadn't stood beside the Alpha King and helped save his kingdom? If I do this, she said slowly, I do it my way. I hire the smiths I want, I set the standards I think are right, and I don't compromise on quality for politics. Agreed. And if the nobles try to sabotage me, and they will, you back me, completely. No wavering, no political calculations. You have my word. Riven looked at the sword on the table, at the weapon she'd poured her skill and soul into creating. Then she looked at Kael, at the man who saw past her scars and her gender and her lack of pedigree to recognize her worth. All right, she said. I'll do it. Kael's smile was like sunrise after a storm. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might regret this. I doubt that very much. He was wrong. The announcement came the next morning, posted in every market square and read aloud by town criers. Riven Ashford, blacksmith of the slums, had been appointed master of the Royal Forge by order of the Alpha King. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The Smiths Guild filed a formal protest, claiming Riven lacked the credentials and experience necessary for such a position. 3 noble houses sent letters demanding her removal. Someone threw a brick through the window of her temporary quarters with a note attached. Whores shouldn't play with hammers. And in the slums where Riven had grown up, where people had known her father and remembered her as that quiet girl who'd inherited his forge, the response was somehow worse. They called her a traitor. She thinks she's better than us now, Riven heard a woman say in the market, sleeping her way into the palace while the rest of us starve. I heard she betrayed the king's mother, someone else whispered. Kept her hidden until she could use her for leverage. My son applied to work at the Royal Forge 3 times and got rejected every time. But some girl spreads her legs and suddenly she's master? It's disgusting. Riven stood frozen in the shadow of a fruit vendor's stall, listening to people she'd known her entire life tear apart her reputation with casual cruelty. She wanted to scream at them, wanted to explain about the fight in the alley, about keeping Seraphine safe, about earning this position through skill and courage, and sheer stubborn refusal to quit. But she knew they wouldn't listen. To the nobles, she would always be the slum rat who'd risen above her station. To the slum dwellers, she would always be the sellout who'd abandoned her people for palace luxury. There was no winning. No matter what she did or how hard she fought, someone would hate her for it. The thought should have broken her. Instead, it made her angry. She'd spent 23 years caring what other people thought, trying to prove herself worthy of respect she was never going to receive. The guildmasters would never accept her. The nobles would never stop whispering. The slums would never forgive her for escaping. So maybe it was time to stop trying to earn their approval and start focusing on the work. She threw herself into the royal forge with manic intensity. The facility was massive, a complex of workshops and furnaces and storage buildings that employed over 50 people. Most of them were journeymen and apprentices, competent but uninspired, going through the motions of their craft without passion or innovation. Riven changed that. She fired 3 smiths on her first day for producing substandard work. She reorganized the entire workshop layout to improve efficiency. She instituted a new quality standard that was so rigorous half the staff threatened to quit. "Let them," Riven told Kyle when he expressed concern. "I'd rather have 10 exceptional smiths than 50 mediocre ones." She hired based on skill alone, bringing in 3 women and a man with a crippled hand that the guild had rejected. The existing staff was horrified. The guild filed another protest. Riven ignored them all and focused on making the finest weapons the kingdom had ever seen. Within 2 weeks, the Royal Forge was producing blades that made visiting dignitaries weep with envy. Within a month, Riven had a waiting list of nobles begging for custom commissions. Within 6 weeks, even the guildmasters had to admit, quietly, grudgingly, that her work was exceptional. But success brought new dangers. The first assassination attempt came on a foggy morning when Riven was walking to the forge. A man with a knife stepped out of an alley and lunged at her throat. Riven broke his wrist with a hammer she'd started carrying everywhere and left him bleeding in the street. The second attempt was poison in her wine at a state dinner. She'd noticed the server's hand shaking and switched glasses with a noble who'd spent the entire evening mocking her. He survived, but barely. The third attempt almost succeeded. She was working late in the forge, alone, except for the night guards outside. The furnace roared, filling the workshop with heat and orange light. Riven was shaping a ceremonial blade for a visiting ambassador, so focused on her work that she didn't hear the door open, didn't hear the footsteps approaching, didn't realize she was in danger until cold steel pressed against her throat. "Don't move," a voice whispered in her ear. Male, cultured, familiar. Riven froze, her heart hammering. "You've made powerful enemies, Master Ashford. People who believe you're a symbol of everything wrong with this kingdom. People who would pay a great deal to see you removed." "Then do it," Riven said quietly. "Stop talking and finish the job." The blade pressed harder, drawing a thin line of blood. "I want you to understand something first. This isn't personal. You're just a piece on a board, and you've been moved to a position that threatens the wrong players." "Is this the part where you explain your master plan?" Riven asked. "Because I'd really rather you just kill me and get it over with." The man laughed, a sound without humor. "Brave to the end, I respect that. But bravery won't save you. Nothing will." He raised the blade. Riven threw herself backward, ignoring the pain as the knife sliced across her shoulder. She crashed into the man and they both went down, grappling on the forge floor amid scattered tools and hot coals. He was stronger, better trained. He should have won. But Riven had spent her entire life fighting people who were bigger and stronger and better than her. She knew how to fight dirty. She grabbed a fistful of ash from the cold section of the forge and threw it in his face. He screamed and released her, clawing at his eyes. Riven scrambled away and grabbed the first weapon she could reach, not a blade, but a pair of tongs still hot from the furnace. She swung them like a club and caught the assassin across the temple. He went down hard and didn't get up. Riven stood over him, breathing hard, blood running down her shoulder. The forge door burst open and guards rushed in, weapons drawn. "Master Ashford, we heard—" The lead guard stopped, taking in the scene. "What happened?" "He happened," Riven said, gesturing to the unconscious assassin. "Third attempt this month." The guards dragged the man away for questioning. A palace physician was summoned to treat Riven's shoulder. Kale arrived an hour later, his face pale with rage. "This has to stop," he said. "Agreed. So execute the nobles funding these attempts and be done with it." "I can't execute people without proof." "Then get proof." "I'm trying." Kale ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration Riven had come to recognize. "But every thread I pull leads to dead ends, or people who mysteriously die before they can testify. Someone powerful is orchestrating this, someone with resources and connections I haven't identified yet." Riven winced as the physician finished stitching her shoulder. "What do you want me to do? Hide? Quit? Run away and let them win?" "I want you to stay alive," Kyle said quietly. "Is that so unreasonable?" Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Something warm and dangerous and terrifying. Over the past 2 months, their relationship had evolved from king and subject to something more complicated. They were friends, certainly, allies, definitely, but there was more beneath the surface, a heat that had nothing to do with the forge fires. Riven looked away first. "I'll be careful." "You said that after the first attempt." "This time I mean it." She didn't, and they both knew it. The attacks continued, a crossbow bolt that missed her by inches, a sabotaged furnace that exploded, sending shrapnel screaming through the workshop, a paid mob that tried to burn down the forge with her inside it. Riven survived them all through a combination of luck, skill, and sheer stubborn refusal to die. But she knew she was running out of both luck and time. The breaking point came on the night of the Winter Festival. Kale had insisted she attend despite her protests. "You're master of the Royal Forge. You can't hide in your workshop forever." So Riven had put on the finest dress she'd ever owned, a deep blue silk that Seraphine had commissioned, and walked into the grand hall feeling like an imposter. The nobles stared, some with curiosity, some with contempt, a few with barely disguised hatred. Riven ignored them all and found her place at Kale's side. The festival was lavish, musicians playing, dancers performing, servants circulating with trays of delicacies that Riven couldn't name. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like walking through a den of vipers. She was watching a juggler when she felt the knife slide between her ribs. Not deeply. Whoever struck her knew exactly how much force to use, how to cause damage without killing instantly. Riven gasped and spun, but the assassin was already disappearing into the crowd, just another noble in expensive clothes. Blood soaked through her dress. The blue silk turned black. Riven pressed her hand to the wound and felt her knees buckle. The grand hall tilted sideways. Voices shouted. Someone screamed. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Kael's face swam into focus above her, twisted with fury and fear. "Riven! Riven! Stay with me! Don't you dare!" "Hurts," she managed. Speaking felt like swallowing broken glass. I know it hurts, but you're going to be fine. Do you hear me? You're going to be fine." She wanted to believe him, but as darkness crept in from the edges of her vision, as her blood pooled on the grand hall's polished floor, Riven couldn't help thinking that maybe Mordrin had been right. Maybe she didn't belong in this world after all. Her last thought before unconsciousness claimed her was simple and bitter. "At least I proved I could make exceptional swords. At least I proved I could make exceptional swords." The thought should have been her last, should have carried her into whatever darkness waited beyond life. Instead, Riven woke to blinding pain and the smell of medicine. She was in a bed, a real bed with clean sheets and soft pillows, in a room she didn't recognize. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, suggesting she'd been unconscious for hours, maybe days. Her entire right side felt like someone had replaced her ribs with broken glass and set them on fire. "Don't move," Seraphine's voice. Riven turned her head, slowly, because even that small motion sent fresh agony through her chest, and found the older woman sitting beside the bed. "How long?" Riven's voice came out as a rasp. 3 days. You lost a great deal of blood." Seraphine's face was drawn, exhausted. "The physician said the blade missed your lung by less than an inch. If it had gone any deeper—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "Where's Kael?" Riven asked. "Hunting the person who did this to you." Seraphine's expression hardened. "He's been intense. He's arrested half the nobles who attended the festival, interrogated them personally, and executed 2 who tried to flee the city. The kingdom is on the edge of chaos. Riven tried to sit up. Her body screamed in protest, and she fell back against the pillows, gasping. "I said don't move," Seraphine chided. "You were stabbed. Rest." "I can't rest, not if the kingdom is falling apart." "The kingdom was already falling apart. You just forced everyone to acknowledge it." Seraphine stood and moved to the window, her silhouette backlit by morning sun. "Do you know what happened after you collapsed?" Riven shook her head. Kael lost control completely. He stood in that grand hall with your blood on his hands and told every noble present that if you died, he would execute them all. Not just the assassin, not just the conspirators, every single one. "That's insane," Riven whispered. "Yes, it was also effective." Seraphine turned to face her. "The nobles are terrified. They've realized that attacking you doesn't weaken Kael. It makes him more dangerous, more unpredictable. They've created exactly the tyrant they claim to fear." Riven absorbed this in silence. She'd wanted to prove herself through her work, through the quality of her craft. Instead, she'd nearly died and pushed the king toward madness. "I need to see him," she said. "He's been here every night, sits in that chair and watches you sleep like he's afraid you'll vanish if he looks away." Seraphine's smile was sad. "My son has had many things in his life: duty, power, responsibility. But I don't think he's ever had something he feared losing until now." The implication in those words made Riven's chest tighten in ways that had nothing to do with her wound. Before she could respond, the door opened and Kael entered. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, and his clothes were rumpled as if he'd been sleeping in them. But when he saw Riven awake, his entire face transformed. "You're awake," he said unnecessarily. "I'm awake," Riven confirmed. Seraphine moved toward the door. "I'll give you 2 some privacy." "Mother, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." She paused in the doorway. "Try not to upset her. She's still healing." Then she was gone, and Riven was alone with the Alpha King. Kael crossed to the bed and sank into the chair Seraphine had vacated. Up close, he looked even worse, haunted, exhausted, barely holding himself together. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what?" "For putting you in danger, for making you a target, for not protecting you well enough." His hands clenched into fists. "I knew they would come after you. I knew it, and I let it happen anyway because I was arrogant enough to think I could control the situation." "You're not responsible for someone else's knife," Riven said. "I'm responsible for everything that happens in this kingdom. That's what being king means." He met her eyes. "I've been interrogating the nobles. Most of them are too frightened to lie, and I've started to piece together the conspiracy. It's bigger than Mordrin, deeper. There's a council of 7 noble houses working together. They call themselves the Old Guard. They've been funding assassination attempts, bribing guards, spreading propaganda in the slums. Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know who's trying to kill you." Kael leaned forward. "And because I'm going to offer you a choice." Riven's stomach tightened. "What kind of choice?" "I can protect you. Give you a new identity, send you somewhere safe, set you up with a forge in a distant territory where the Old Guard's reach doesn't extend. You'd have to leave behind the title of master, but you'd be alive. You'd be safe. Or you stay. You help me destroy the Old Guard completely. Not just survive their attacks, but dismantle their power base piece by piece until they're nothing but names in history books." His voice dropped. "But that path is dangerous. They'll keep coming after you, and next time I might not reach you in time." Riven didn't need to think about it. "I'm staying." "Riven, I'm staying," she repeated, putting steel in her voice despite the pain. "I didn't survive being stabbed just to run away and hide. These people think they can terrorize me into submission. They're about to learn why that was a mistake." Kael searched her face, and whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. "All right. Then we do this together. How do we fight people who hide in shadows and work through intermediaries? We drag them into the light." Kael stood and began to pace, energy returning to his movements as he shifted into strategist mode. The old guard's power comes from three sources: wealth, political influence, and the belief among common people that the old ways are better. We need to attack all three simultaneously. I'm a blacksmith, not a politician, Riven pointed out. You're more than a blacksmith now. You're a symbol. Kyle stopped pacing and looked at her. The old guard has been spreading rumors about you in the slums, claiming you betrayed your people, that you're corrupt, that you got your position through seduction rather than skill. I know, I've heard them. What if we prove them wrong? Publicly? Undeniably? Riven's mind raced. You want me to make something so exceptional that even my enemies have to acknowledge my skill. Not just something. The crown blade. Riven's breath caught. The crown blade was legendary, a ceremonial weapon forged for each new ruler, meant to represent the kingdom's strength and the monarch's right to rule. It was the highest honor a smith could receive, typically reserved for guild masters with decades of experience. I've been delaying commissioning it, Kael continued, waiting for the right moment, the right smith. This is that moment, and you're that smith. The guild will riot. Let them. The crown blade isn't chosen by the guild, it's chosen by the king. His smile was sharp. And I choose you. When would I need to complete it? The spring equinox, 6 weeks from today. I'm hosting a grand festival, nobles from every territory, foreign dignitaries, representatives from the major guilds. The crown blade will be presented publicly, and everyone will see the quality of your work. 6 weeks to create a masterpiece while recovering from a near-fatal wound and dodging assassination attempts. It was impossible, which meant Riven had to do it. I'll need access to the royal treasury, she said. The finest steel, rare metals for the pommel and guard, gemstones for decoration, and I'll need my best smiths working with me. Done. Whatever you need. And I want full authority to redesign the security protocols at the forge. No one gets in without my approval. No exceptions. Agreed. Riven settled back against her pillows, exhaustion pulling at her despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Then I'll do it. I'll make you a crown blade that will be remembered for generations. Kael's expression softened. Rest first. The blade can wait until you're healed. The blade can't wait. 6 weeks isn't much time. Riven closed her eyes. But I'll rest tonight. Tomorrow, we start changing the kingdom. She felt Kyle's hand close around hers, warm, rough with old scars, steady as stone. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not running. For not giving up. For being exactly who you are. Riven wanted to say something meaningful, something that matched the weight of the moment. But exhaustion was dragging her down, and all she could manage was, "You picked the wrong hero again." Kyle's laugh was soft and warm. "No, I really didn't." She drifted off to sleep with his hand still holding hers. The next morning, against the physician's protests and Seraphine's dire warnings, Riven returned to the forge. Her smiths were waiting, the women and the crippled man she'd hired, along with 3 journeymen who'd proven their loyalty during the assassination attempts. They stood as she entered, their expressions a mixture of relief and concern. "Master Ashford," one of the women began, "you should be resting." "I should be working," Riven interrupted. "We have 6 weeks to create the crown blade, and I intend to make it the finest weapon this kingdom has ever seen. Who's with me?" Every hand went up. Riven smiled. "Good, then let's get started." The work consumed her. She spent the first week designing, sketching dozens of variations until she found the perfect balance of form and function. The crown blade had to be beautiful, worthy of display in throne rooms and museums, but it also had to be deadly. Kyle was a warrior king. His blade needed to be something he could actually use in battle, not just a pretty ornament. The second week was devoted to selecting materials. Riven rejected 3 shipments of steel before finding metal pure enough for her standards. She commissioned a master jeweler to create the pommel, a wolf's head done in silver and obsidian that captured Kyle's fierce nature. The guard would be blackened steel inlaid with gold wire in patterns that represented the kingdom's 5 territories. By the 3rd week, Riven was strong enough to work the forge herself again. Her stitches pulled and her ribs ached, but she pushed through the pain and began the actual forging. She worked 16-hour days, barely sleeping, eating only when Seraphine physically brought food to the workshop. The blade took shape slowly, folded steel creating patterns that looked like flowing water, the edge sharp enough to split falling silk, the balance so perfect it felt weightless in the hand. Her smiths watched in awe as she worked, learning techniques they'd never seen before. Riven taught as she forged, sharing every trick her father had taught her and every innovation she'd discovered through years of struggle. "Why are you showing us this?" one of the journeymen asked. "These are secrets worth gold." "Secrets are worthless if they die with you," Riven replied. "I want you to be better smiths than I am. I want you to create weapons that make this one look crude. That's how we move forward." Word of the Crown Blade's creation spread through Thornmarch like wildfire. Nobles who'd mocked Riven suddenly found reasons to visit the forge, trying to catch glimpses of the work in progress. Guildmasters sent formal requests to observe, requests Riven denied with barely concealed satisfaction. The old guard sent another assassin. He came at night, disguised as a delivery worker, with a crossbow hidden under his cloak. He made it 3 steps into the forge before Riven's new security protocols stopped him. She'd hired guards who'd served under Kyle personally, men whose loyalty couldn't be bought or threatened. They caught the assassin, disarmed him, and delivered him to the king's interrogators. Under questioning, he named the noble who'd hired him, Lord Castellan, one of the 7 houses comprising the Old Guard. Kyle had Castellan arrested and his assets seized within hours. The message was clear. Attack Riven, and you attack the king. 1 down, 6 to go. By the 5th week, the Crown Blade was nearly complete. Riven had worked herself to exhaustion, pushing her healing body past its limits, but the result was worth it. The weapon was breathtaking, a perfect marriage of artistry and lethality that seemed to glow with inner fire even when sheathed. She was polishing the final edge when Seraphine entered the forge. "You need to see this," the older woman said, her expression troubled. She handed Riven a broadsheet, one of the cheap news publications that circulated through the slums. The headline made Riven's stomach drop. "The Blacksmith's Betrayal: How Riven Ashford Sold Her Soul for Power." The article beneath was vicious. It claimed Riven had deliberately endangered the king's mother to create a crisis she could exploit. That she'd seduced Kyle to secure her position. That the assassination attempts were staged to gain sympathy. Every achievement was twisted into evidence of manipulation and corruption. And at the bottom, in smaller print, this publication funded by concerned citizens who remember when honor meant something. Translation: The Old Guard was fighting back with propaganda. "It gets worse," Seraphine said quietly. "There are copies posted throughout the slums. People are reading them, believing them." Riven crumpled the broadsheet in her fist. "Let them believe what they want. I'm done trying to convince people I'm worthy of respect." "But the Spring Festival is in 1 week. If public opinion turns against you, then it turns against me," Riven interrupted. "I can't control what people think. All I can control is the quality of my work." She returned to polishing the blade, her movements sharp with anger. Seraphine watched her for a long moment. "My son is lucky to have you." "Your son is stuck with me," Riven corrected. "There's a difference." "Not from where I'm standing." The Spring Festival arrived with perfect weather and terrible tension. Nobles from across the kingdom filled the palace, along with representatives from neighboring realms and every major guild. The grand hall had been decorated with banners and flowers, transforming it into something out of a fairy tale. Riven felt like she was walking into an execution. She wore armor instead of a dress, ceremonial plate that Kyle had commissioned, decorated with the royal wolf and fitted to her frame. If people were going to call her a warrior, she might as well look like one. The presentation of the crown blade was scheduled for midday, after the formal greetings and before the feast. Riven stood in the antechamber with the weapon wrapped in black velvet, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Ready?" Kyle asked. He wore his full royal regalia, crown, robes, the works, but his eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that had nothing to do with ceremony. "No," Riven admitted, "but I'm going anyway." His smile was quick and fierce. "That's my girl." The words sent warmth flooding through her chest, but there was no time to examine what they meant. The herald was announcing them, and the grand hall doors were opening. They walked in together, king and smith, and the assembled crowd fell silent. Riven had never seen so many people in one place. Every noble house was represented. The guild masters stood in a cluster, their expressions ranging from skeptical to hostile. Foreign dignitaries watched with polite interest. And in the gallery above, common citizens who'd won lottery spots to witness the ceremony pressed against the rails for a better view. Kael ascended to his throne. Riven took her place beside it, still holding the wrapped blade. Lords and ladies, Kael's voice filled the hall. Representatives of the guilds, honored guests from abroad, citizens of Thornmarch. We are gathered today to witness a tradition that stretches back 300 years, the presentation of the crown blade. He gestured to Riven. Master Ashford, if you would. This was it. The moment that would define her career, her reputation, her entire life. Riven stepped forward and unwrapped the blade. The grand hall gasped as one. Even in the diffused light from the stained glass windows, the crown blade blazed. The folded steel created patterns that seemed to move and flow like water. The wolf's head pommel snarled with such lifelike intensity that it looked ready to leap from the hilt. The gold inlay caught the light and scattered it in 1,000 directions. It was, without question, a masterpiece. Riven presented the blade to Kael, kneeling as protocol demanded. Your Majesty, I present the crown blade, forged in fire and tempered in blood. May it serve the kingdom as long as steel endures. Kael took the weapon and stood. He drew it with a sound like singing metal and held it aloft. The blade caught the light from above and seemed to ignite, blazing so brightly that people in the back of the hall shielded their eyes. This, Kael said, his voice ringing with pride, is what skill looks like, what dedication produces, what happens when we value merit over birthright and courage over tradition. He lowered the blade and pointed it at the guild masters. You rejected this woman's application, called her unworthy, told her she had no place in your ranks. Then he turned to the nobles. You called her a whore and a traitor. You sent assassins to kill her. You spread lies about her character and her achievements. Finally, he addressed the entire hall. And she responded by creating something none of you could match in a lifetime of trying. This blade will outlast all of us. It will be displayed in museums, studied by future smiths, and remembered long after our names are dust. He sheathed the weapon and extended his hand to Riven. Rise, Master Ashford. You kneel to no one. Riven stood, her throat tight with emotion. And then something unexpected happened. One of the foreign dignitaries, a woman from the Eastern Territories, began to applaud. Slowly at first, then louder. One of the common citizens in the gallery joined her, then another, and another. The applause spread like wildfire through the hall. Not everyone joined in. The guildmasters stood silent and stone-faced. Several nobles looked like they'd swallowed poison. But enough people were clapping, enough voices were raised in approval that the dissenters were drowned out. Riven stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sound. Wave, Kael murmured beside her. They're applauding you. She raised her hand in a gesture somewhere between a wave and a salute, and the applause grew louder. For the first time in her life, Riven Ashford was being celebrated for exactly who she was. The feast that followed was a blur. Nobles approached to congratulate her, some sincere, some clearly trying to curry favor with the king. The foreign dignitary who'd started the applause sought her out personally. That was the finest blade I've ever seen, the woman said in accented but clear speech. If you ever tire of working for the kingdom, the Eastern Territories would welcome you with great honor. Thank you, Riven managed, but I'm not going anywhere. More offers followed, requests for commissions, invitations to demonstrate her techniques. One young noble even asked if she was accepting apprentices. Through it all, Kael stayed close, a solid presence at her side. Every time someone's congratulations felt too insincere or their interest too calculating, she'd catch his eye and he'd find a reason to extract her from the conversation. They were partners now, a team. It felt right in a way Riven had never experienced before. The evening was winding down when a commotion erupted near the entrance to the grand hall. Riven heard shouting, the sound of people pushing through the crowd. Then she saw them, a group of slum dwellers still wearing their work clothes, being escorted by palace guards. At their head was Marcus, a blacksmith who'd worked with her father years ago. "We need to speak to Master Ashford," Marcus was saying. "It's urgent." "It's all right," Riven called out. "Let them through." The guards parted, and Marcus approached, his hat clutched in his hands. Up close, Riven could see he'd been crying. "I'm sorry," he said without preamble. "We're all sorry. We believed the lies about you. Said terrible things. We thought—" His voice broke. "We thought you'd abandoned us. But we saw the blade today. We saw what you can do. And we realized we were wrong." Behind him, the other slum dwellers nodded, their faces reflecting shame and regret. "We know we don't deserve your forgiveness," Marcus continued, "but we wanted you to know that we're proud of you. All of us. You came from nothing and became something great, and instead of celebrating that, we tore you down because we were jealous and scared." Riven's chest felt too tight. "Marcus, let me finish." He straightened his shoulders. "We're starting a fund, collecting money from everyone in the slums who said something cruel about you. We're going to use it to create scholarships for young smiths who can't afford guild fees. We'll call them the Ashford Scholarships, if you'll permit it, so that other kids like you don't have to fight as hard to prove themselves." Tears were streaming down Riven's face now, and she didn't bother to hide them. "You don't need my permission," she said, "but you have my blessing, and my thanks." Marcus smiled, a genuine, warm expression. "You've made us proud, Riven. Your father would have been so proud." That broke her completely. Riven stepped forward and pulled Marcus into a fierce hug, not caring that she was wearing ceremonial armor and he smelled of coal smoke and honest work. "Thank you," she whispered, "for remembering him, for remembering where I came from." When they finally separated, half the grand hall was watching. Some nobles looked scandalized that a master would embrace a common smith. Others looked thoughtful, as if seeing something they'd never considered before. Kael was smiling. The slum dwellers left, and the feast gradually wound down. By midnight, only a handful of guests remained. Riven found herself standing on a balcony overlooking the city, breathing in cool night air and trying to process everything that had happened. Kael found her there. "You did it," he said quietly. "You proved them all wrong." "Not all of them. The old guard is still out there, still plotting. Let them plot. After today, their power is broken. The people saw what you're capable of. They saw me defend you publicly, and most importantly, they saw that change doesn't have to mean chaos." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You've changed this kingdom, Riven. Maybe not the whole thing yet, but you've started something that can't be stopped." "I just made a sword." "You did a lot more than that." Kael turned to face her fully. "You survived. You fought. You refused to compromise or quit or become less than you are, even when it would have been easier. That matters more than you know." Riven met his eyes and saw something there that made her breath catch. Not just respect or gratitude, but something deeper. Something that had been building since the first day he'd walked into her forge. "Kael," she began, not even sure what she wanted to say. He reached out and took her hand. "I know this is complicated. You're master of the royal forge. I'm the king, and there are about 1,000 reasons why this would be a terrible idea." "This? Us." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "But I don't care about the reasons anymore. I just know that when I thought you were dying, when I held you in that hall with your blood on my hands, I realized I'd give up the crown itself if it meant keeping you safe." Riven's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own voice. "That's a very dramatic declaration. I'm a very dramatic person." Despite everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the weight of the day, Riven laughed. "Yes, you really are. So what do you say? Can we try this? See where it goes?" Riven thought about all the reasons to refuse. The political complications, the scrutiny it would bring, the way the nobles would never accept her not just as master, but as the king's partner. Then she thought about Kael's hand in hers, steady and warm, about the way he'd stood beside her through assassination attempts and public humiliation, about how he saw her not as a symbol or a tool or a conquest, but as herself. "Yes," she said simply. "Let's try." Kael's smile could have lit the entire city. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. Riven didn't pull away. She closed the distance between them and kissed him with all the pent-up emotion of the past months, fear and anger and desperate hope, and something that might have been love. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kael rested his forehead against hers. "The old guard is going to hate this," he murmured. "They already hate me. Might as well give them a good reason." He laughed and pulled her close, and for a moment, standing on that balcony with the city spread out below them, Riven let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd found somewhere she belonged. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The old guard would regroup and strike back. The nobles would scheme. The kingdom would continue its painful transformation. But tonight, the blacksmith and the king stood together, and that was enough. The first attack came 3 days later. Not with knives or poison or assassins in the dark, but with law. The remaining 6 houses of the old guard filed a formal petition with the High Council demanding Riven's removal from her position as master of the Royal Forge on grounds of impropriety and conflict of interest. "She's the king's paramour," Lord Brennan declared during the emergency session. He was the eldest of the old guard, a man in his 70s with ice in his veins and centuries of aristocratic certainty in his voice. "Her relationship with His Majesty compromises her ability to serve the crown impartially. She must be removed." Kyle stood before the council, his expression carved from stone. Master Ashford's personal life is irrelevant to her professional competence. "Is it?" Lady Vex, another of the old guard, leaned forward with predatory interest. "Can you honestly claim that your affection for her doesn't influence your decisions? That you haven't given her preferential treatment, special protections, resources that other smiths would never receive?" "I've given her exactly what she's earned through exceptional work." "Have you?" Brennan's smile was cold. "Or have you given her what she's earned through exceptional services of a different nature?" The implication hung in the air like poison. Riven, standing beside Kael in the council chamber, felt rage build in her chest. She'd expected this, had known the moment she and Kael made their relationship public that the old guard would weaponize it, but knowing didn't make it hurt less. "Careful, Lord Brennan," Kael's voice dropped to something dangerous. "You're dangerously close to treason. I'm exercising my rights as a member of this council to question decisions that affect the entire kingdom." Brennan gestured to the other council members, a mix of old nobility and newer appointments. "We're not asking you to end your relationship. We're simply asking that you remove the appearance of impropriety by appointing a new master, someone with proper credentials, someone whose loyalty to the crown isn't complicated." Kael's jaw clenched. "The answer is no." "Then we'll put it to a vote." Brennan looked around the chamber, all in favor of removing Riven Ashford from her position as master of the Royal Forge. 4 hands went up, all members of the old guard. Opposed? 3 hands. Kael's supporters, younger nobles who'd benefited from his reforms. 4 to 3. The old guard had won, but Kael had one more card to play. "As king, I exercise my right of royal veto. The motion is denied." Brennan's expression didn't change, but Riven saw fury flash in his eyes. "You're setting a dangerous precedent, Your Majesty. Using your veto to protect your lover suggests that your judgment is compromised." "My judgment is fine. It's yours I'm questioning." Kael stepped forward. "You claim to care about the kingdom's welfare, but all I see is a group of scared old men clinging to power they no longer deserve. Master Ashford has proven her worth 10 times over. The only thing she lacks is your approval, and frankly, that's more of a recommendation than a criticism." "You can't veto forever," Lady Vex warned. "Eventually, you'll need this council's support, and we have long memories." "So do I," Kael replied. "This session is adjourned." He turned and walked out, Riven following. Behind them, she could hear the old guard already plotting their next move. In the corridor outside, Kael's composure finally cracked. He slammed his fist against the stone wall hard enough to leave blood on the stone. "They're not going to stop," he said through gritted teeth. "They'll keep pushing, keep undermining, keep finding new ways to attack you until either I give in or the kingdom tears itself apart." "Then we give them what they want," Riven said quietly. Kael spun to face her. "Absolutely not. I'm not removing you. I don't mean that. Riven's mind was racing, pieces falling into place. They want proof that I earned my position through skill, not favoritism, so let's give them undeniable proof. The crown blade wasn't enough? The crown blade proved I can make one exceptional weapon, but they'll claim it was a fluke, that I had help, that it was designed by committee, and I just swung the hammer. Riven's smile was sharp. What if I competed against the best smiths in the kingdom, publicly, in a contest designed by the guild itself, judged by neutral observers? If I win, they have to admit I'm qualified. If I lose, she shrugged, then they were right all along. Kale stared at her like she'd lost her mind. That's insane. The guild would stack the competition against you. They'd make the challenges impossible. Let them try. Riven's confidence wasn't bravado. It was cold calculation. She'd spent her entire life being underestimated, and every single time she'd turned it into an advantage. I'm better than they are. All of them. It's time I proved it in a way even the old guard can't deny. And if something goes wrong, if they sabotage you or the judges are biased then I lose a competition. I've lost before. I'll survive. Riven reached out and took his hand. But if I win, we remove their strongest weapon. They can't call me unqualified if I've beaten every master in the kingdom. Kyle was silent for a long moment, war clearly raging behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded. All right, but I'm setting the terms. No interference from the old guard, no biased judges, and if I even suspect foul play, the whole thing gets shut down immediately. Fair enough. He pulled her into a fierce embrace. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish. Probably both, Riven admitted against his chest. The announcement of the grand forging competition sent shockwaves through Thornmarch. The guild, caught off guard by a challenge they couldn't refuse without looking like cowards, scrambled to organize the event. They set 3 trials, each designed to test a different aspect of smithing mastery: precision, creativity, and endurance. 12 competitors entered, 11 guild masters with decades of experience, and Riven. The entire kingdom watched. The first trial took place in the guild's main workshop, a massive space filled with forges and tools and the accumulated history of 3 centuries of metalwork. Riven stood at her assigned station and tried not to think about the hundreds of spectators packed into the gallery above. The challenge was simple but brutal. Create a lock mechanism so precise that only the key you forge can open it. Judges would test each lock with dozens of similar keys to ensure absolute uniqueness. They had 4 hours. Riven blocked out everything: the watching crowds, the sneering guildmasters, the weight of what rode on this competition, and focused on the metal. This was what she knew, what she'd been born to do. Her hands moved with practiced certainty. File, measure, test, adjust. The lock took shape piece by piece, each component fitted with tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter. She'd made locks before, hundreds of them, for merchants who needed to protect valuable goods, but never one this complex. At the 3-hour mark, one of the other competitors, a gray-haired master named Henrik, stopped by her station on his way to fetch more water. You're wasting your time with that design, he said, not unkindly. Too many moving parts. It'll never hold. Riven didn't look up. Thanks for the advice. Just trying to help. No shame in withdrawing if you're in over your head. I'm not. Henrik shrugged and moved on. Riven kept working. When time was called, Riven had a lock that looked deceptively simple. A brass cylinder with a single keyhole, but contained 17 internal mechanisms that had to align perfectly for the key to turn. The testing took another 2 hours. Each smith's lock was subjected to picks, false keys, and attempts to force it open. 9 of the 12 locks were defeated by skilled locksmiths the guild had hired. Riven's held. So did Henrik's and one other, a young master named Celine, who'd been watching Riven with calculating interest throughout the trial. 3 competitors remained. The second trial was held outdoors in the palace courtyard, where temporary forges had been set up. This time, the challenge was artistic. Create a decorative piece that demonstrates technical skill and aesthetic vision. Subject and materials were the smith's choice. 6 hours. Riven chose to make a sculpture of a wolf, a nod to Kael's personal symbol, but also a statement about her own journey. She used 3 different metals: iron for the body, copper for accents, and silver for the eyes. The wolf would be mid-leap, frozen in motion, every muscle and tendon visible beneath the metal fur. It was ambitious, possibly too ambitious for the time allowed. Henrik chose something safer, an ornate candelabra with 7 branches. Celine went for a decorative sword, non-functional but beautiful. Riven worked like she was possessed. Hammer, bend, weld, polish. Her hands blistered, her back screamed. The spring sun beat down mercilessly, turning the courtyard into an oven. She didn't slow down. At hour 4, her wolf's body was complete. At hour 5, the copper accents were in place. At hour 5.5, she was polishing the silver eyes when her hand slipped. The sculpture tumbled from her workbench and crashed onto the cobblestones. The crowd gasped. Riven's heart stopped. But when she picked up the wolf, nothing was broken. The impact had actually improved one of the joins she'd been worried about, fusing the metals more thoroughly. Sometimes, Riven reflected, even mistakes worked in her favor. She finished with 10 minutes to spare. The judges, 3 foreign smiths with no stake in kingdom politics, examined each piece in silence. They measured, tested joints, checked for flaws. The crowd watched with held breath. Finally, the head judge spoke. Henrik's candelabra is technically perfect, but uninspired. Celine's sword is beautiful, but lacks structural integrity. Riven's wolf is exceptional, both as art and as demonstration of multi-metal fusion techniques we've rarely seen executed this well. He pointed to Riven. You advance. The crowd erupted. Riven heard cheers and boos in equal measure, but she was too exhausted to care. 2 competitors remained. The third and final trial was announced the next morning. Forge a blade suitable for combat. No restrictions on design, but it must be functional, balanced, and capable of holding an edge under stress testing. Time limit, 12 hours, start to finish. And one more condition, added by the head judge. Both smiths will use the same forge, the same tools, and the same stock of metal. This ensures absolute equality of resources. Riven and Celine stood in the guild's master workshop, facing each other across a single massive forge. The younger woman's expression was neutral, but Riven could see calculation in her eyes. May the best smith win, Celine said. I intend to, Riven replied. The bell rang. They began. 12 hours was an eternity and an eye blink. Riven fell into the rhythm she knew better than breathing. Heat, hammer, fold, heat again. She was making a longsword balanced for speed and versatility. Nothing fancy, nothing experimental. Just perfect execution of fundamental technique. Across the forge, Celine worked with impressive efficiency. She was making a saber, lighter, faster, optimized for slashing rather than thrusting. Smart choice. At hour 6, they both stopped to let their blades cool enough for grinding. In the momentary pause, Celine spoke. I don't hate you, you know. Riven looked up, surprised. Could have fooled me. I hate what you represent. The idea that the old ways don't matter, that centuries of tradition can be thrown aside for political convenience. Celine's voice was quiet enough that only Riven could hear. But I watched you work these past 3 days. You're good. Better than good. If the guild had accepted your application 5 years ago, you'd probably be a master by now through normal channels. Then why are you competing against me? Because someone has to. Celine returned her attention to her blade. The old guard needs to know they can't win through skill alone, that their only hope is politics and corruption. When you beat me today, and you probably will, it proves something important. What's that? That merit actually does matter. That the king isn't just playing favorites. Celine's smile was sad. I'm part of the old system. I earned my position the traditional way, and I'm about to lose to someone the system tried to crush. That's a powerful message. Riven didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and returned to her work. The final hours were a blur. Grind, polish, sharpen, test. Both blades took shape under their maker's hands. Riven's longsword straight and deadly. Celine's saber curved and elegant. When time was called, Riven's entire body ached. Her hands were raw despite her calluses, but her sword was finished. The testing was the most rigorous yet. Each blade was used to cut rope, leather, and thin steel plate. Then they were struck against stone to test for chips or cracks. Finally, they were given to professional soldiers who sparred with them, testing balance and handling. Both blades performed beautifully. The judges conferred for nearly 30 minutes, while the crowd grew restless. Finally, they emerged. "This is the closest decision we've ever had to make," the head judge announced. "Both blades are exceptional examples of the smith's art. Both would serve a warrior well in battle. The difference comes down to execution of details so small, most people would never notice them." He paused for effect. "Celine's saber has a microscopic warp in the fuller that will eventually cause structural weakness. It's not a flaw she could have detected without specialized tools, and it doesn't affect current performance. But it's there." The judge turned to Riven. "Riven's long sword is perfect. Every measurement, every angle, every edge, precisely where it should be. In a craft where close enough is often acceptable, she achieved absolute accuracy." He raised Riven's sword. "The winner of the Grand Forging competition, and the undisputed proof of mastery, Riven Ashford." The crowd's reaction was deafening. Some cheered, some shouted in anger. The guildmasters looked like they'd been forced to swallow poison, but the old guard, watching from their place of honor in the gallery, were silent. Riven had won, not through politics or favoritism or seduction, through pure, undeniable skill. Lord Brennan rose from his seat, his face carefully blank. "The council recognizes the outcome of this competition. Master Ashford has proven her qualifications beyond dispute." It was the closest thing to an apology Riven would ever get from him. Kyle, standing at the front of the crowd, was grinning like a madman. When the formal ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, he pushed through to reach her. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it. Did you doubt me?" "Not for a second." He pulled her into his arms, not caring who saw. "I love you, Riven Ashford. Have I mentioned that?" The words hit Riven like a physical blow. They'd been dancing around the feeling for weeks, but neither had said it out loud. "I love you too," she whispered against his shoulder. "Even though you're impossible and dramatic and have terrible taste in council members." His laugh was warm and real. "Want to get out of here?" Desperately. They fled the guild hall hand in hand, leaving behind the politics and the posturing and the weight of expectations. For a few hours, they were just Kyle and Riven, two people who'd found each other in the chaos and decided to hold on. But reality waited for no one. The old guard made their final move 1 week later. It came not as an attack on Riven, but as a coordinated rebellion. 3 of the remaining 6 houses declared their intention to secede from the kingdom, claiming Kyle's reforms had violated the ancient compacts that bound the territories together. It was civil war, wrapped in legal language. Kyle called an emergency council meeting. The chamber was packed with nobles taking sides, military commanders calculating logistics, and bureaucrats trying to figure out how to keep the kingdom functioning if a third of it split away. "This is what they wanted all along," Seraphine said quietly. She'd taken a seat beside Riven, her face grave. "Push Kyle until he either backs down or faces open rebellion. Either way, they weaken him." "Can he win a civil war?" Riven asked. "Militarily? Yes. He has the loyalty of the army and the support of the common people. But winning a war against his own subjects would break something in him." Seraphine's eyes were distant. "I've seen what civil war does to kingdoms, to people. The wounds never fully heal." Kale stood before the council, looking older than his 30 years. "I'm open to hearing alternatives." "Give them what they want," Lord Brennan said immediately. "Reverse the most controversial reforms. Restore the old power structures. Let them see you're willing to compromise." "You mean let them see I can be bullied into submission," Kyle corrected. "I mean save the kingdom from tearing itself apart over pride." "It's not pride. It's principle." Kale's voice was hard. "I reformed the guard because it was corrupt. I elevated skilled people regardless of birth because competence matters more than bloodline. I won't undo that just because some nobles are throwing a tantrum." "Then you'll have war," Lady Vex said, "and thousands will die because you refuse to bend." The council erupted into argument. Nobles shouted over each other. Accusations flew, and through it all, Kyle stood silent and still. Finally, he raised his hand. The chamber fell quiet. "I have a counter-proposal," he said. A challenge to the three houses threatening secession. You claim my reforms violate tradition. I claim tradition was already broken by your corruption and incompetence. So let's settle it the old way. Brennan's eyes narrowed. What old way? Trial by combat. 3 champions chosen by the seceding houses against 3 chosen by me. Winner takes all. If they win, I reverse the reforms. If I win, they swear renewed loyalty and stop obstructing progress. The chamber exploded. This was ancient law, rarely invoked but technically still valid. It was also insane. You can't be serious, Lady Vex said. I'm completely serious. You want tradition? Fine. We'll honor the oldest tradition of all, proving the truth through strength. And if we refuse, then you're admitting you don't actually believe in the traditions you claim to defend. You're just using them as weapons when convenient. Kale's smile was cold. What's it going to be? The old guard conferred in whispered arguments. Finally, Brennan stood. We accept. 3 days from now, in the arena, our champions against yours. Done. The council adjourned in chaos. Riven followed Kyle to his private chambers, her mind racing. Do you have 3 champions who can win? I have 2 for certain, Commander Thane and Captain Garrett, both exceptional fighters, loyal to the core. Kale paced the room. The third is the problem. I need someone skilled enough to stand with them, but also someone whose victory would be symbolic. Someone who represents everything the old guard hates. He stopped pacing and looked at Riven. No, she said immediately. Absolutely not. You fought 5 guards in an alley and won. You defeated trained soldiers. You're faster than most of my champions and you fight dirty when you need to. I'm not a warrior. I'm a smith who's had to defend herself. There's a difference. Is there? Kale moved closer. The old guard has spent months trying to destroy you through politics. What if you beat them through combat instead? What if the final proof that merit matters more than birth comes from you standing in that arena and refusing to fall? You're asking me to risk my life to make a political point. I'm asking you to stand beside me one more time, to show the kingdom that the future we're building is worth fighting for. He took her hands. I won't force you. If you say no, I'll find someone else. But I can't think of anyone I'd rather have watching my back. Riven wanted to refuse, wanted to explain that she was terrified, that she'd been lucky in her past fights, that eventually her luck would run out. But she looked at Kyle and saw the weight he carried, saw the impossible choice he'd made, war or submission, with no middle ground, and she realized she couldn't let him face that alone. I'll do it, she said, but you're training me for the next 3 days. No sleep, no rest. If I'm going into that arena, I'm going in ready. Kale's relief was visible. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me if I survive. The 3 days that followed were the hardest of Riven's life. Kyle trained her personally, along with Commander Thane and Captain Garrett. They worked from dawn until midnight, drilling techniques and strategies until Riven's muscles screamed and her mind went numb. She learned to fight with a sword, really fight, not just survive. Learned to read an opponent's stance, to exploit weaknesses, to conserve energy for when it mattered most. You're improving, Thane said on the second day, after Riven had finally managed to land a hit on him. Raw talent combined with absolute fearlessness. It's a dangerous combination. For me or my opponent? Both. On the third day, Seraphine pulled Riven aside. I have something for you, she said, presenting a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was armor, lightweight, flexible, designed for speed rather than heavy protection. It was also decorated with wolves and hammers, a perfect marriage of Kyle's symbol and Riven's craft. I can't accept this, Riven said. It's too much. You can and you will. Seraphine's voice was firm. You're about to fight for my son's kingdom. The least I can do is make sure you're properly equipped. Riven pulled the older woman into a fierce hug. Thank you for everything. Win tomorrow, Seraphine said. That's all the thanks I need. The arena was packed. Thousands of citizens filled the stands, along with every noble in the kingdom and representatives from foreign realms. This wasn't just a trial by combat. It was theater, politics, and potential revolution all rolled into one bloody spectacle. Riven stood in the preparation chamber beneath the arena, wearing Seraphine's armor and carrying a sword she'd forged herself. Beside her, Commander Thane checked his weapons with mechanical precision, while Captain Garrett paced nervously. "First time?" Riven asked him. "In an arena?" "Yes." "In a fight that decides the fate of a kingdom?" "Also yes." Garrett's laugh was strained. "You?" "Same. At least we're all terrified together." The door opened. Kale entered, wearing his full royal regalia. He looked at each of them in turn. "I know what I'm asking of you," he said quietly. "I know the risks. If any of you want to withdraw, now's the time. I'll find a replacement. No judgment." No one moved. Kale nodded. "Then know this. Win or lose, you're the 3 bravest people I've ever known. It's been an honor to stand with you." A horn sounded above. Time to enter the arena. They climbed the stairs and emerged into blinding sunlight and deafening noise. The crowd roared, some cheering, some jeering, all united in their hunger to watch blood spill on sand. Across the arena, the Old Guard's champions entered, 3 massive warriors in heavy armor, each carrying weapons that looked like they could cleave stone. Riven's stomach dropped. These weren't just fighters, they were killers chosen specifically to ensure the Old Guard's victory. The rules were simple. 3-on-3 combat, last team standing wins. No surrender, no mercy. The horn sounded again. They charged. Thane met the first champion head-on, sword against axe, strength against strength. They were evenly matched, both veterans, both skilled, both willing to die for their cause. Garrett engaged the second champion, a woman with twin blades who moved like water. He was outmatched, but holding his ground through sheer determination, which left Riven facing the third champion. He was enormous, at least 6.5 feet tall, armored like a fortress, carrying a warhammer that probably weighed more than Riven did. "You're the blacksmith," he said, his voice surprisingly refined. "The king's whore who thinks she can fight." Riven didn't waste breath on a response. She attacked. Her sword bounced off his armor like striking stone. He swung the warhammer in a wide arc that would have pulped her skull if it had connected. Riven ducked and rolled, her lighter armor giving her the speed advantage. But speed only mattered if she could find a weakness. She circled him, looking for gaps in his armor. There, under the arm, where the plates had to allow for movement, and there, behind the knee. The champion lunged. Riven sidestepped and drove her blade into the gap under his arm. He roared and backhanded her with his free hand. The impact sent Riven flying. She hit the sand hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. "Get up!" Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Get up or die." Riven got up. The champion was bleeding from the wound she'd given him, but he was still standing, still dangerous. He raised the warhammer for a killing blow, and Riven threw a fistful of sand into his eyes. Dirty fighting, street tactics, everything the noble art of combat wasn't supposed to be. The champion stumbled, clawing at his face. Riven didn't give him time to recover. She drove her sword through the gap behind his knee, severing tendons. He crashed to the ground with a sound like a falling tree. 1 down. Riven turned to see Thane had defeated his opponent, but Garrett was losing badly. The woman with twin blades had cut him a dozen times, and he was barely staying on his feet. Riven ran to help. Together, she and Garrett managed to overwhelm the woman through sheer, desperate coordination. Garrett fell the moment she dropped, blood soaking through his armor. "I'm fine," he gasped. "Just need a minute." "You've got it," Riven said. "Thane and I will finish this." But there were no opponents left standing. The arena fell silent. Then, slowly, the crowd began to cheer. It started with the common citizens in the cheap seats and spread like wildfire until even some of the nobles were applauding. Kale descended from the royal box and entered the arena. He helped Riven to her feet, his eyes blazing with pride and relief. "You won," he said. "We won," Riven corrected. Lord Brennan approached, his face gray. The 3 seceding houses had no choice now. Ancient law demanded they honor the combat's outcome. "The Old Guard concedes," he said stiffly. "We will not pursue secession. We will cooperate with your Majesty's reforms." "See that you do," Kael said. His voice carried across the arena. The trial is complete. The law is satisfied, and the kingdom moves forward together. The crowd's roar was deafening. 6 months later, Riven stood in the royal forge and watched the spring sun stream through windows she'd personally redesigned to improve lighting. The forge was thriving. Her staff had grown to 30 smiths, including 5 women and 3 people the guild had rejected for various unsuitable characteristics. Production was at an all-time high, quality was exceptional, and commissions from foreign kingdoms kept the waiting list full for months. The guild had finally, grudgingly, extended Riven an invitation to join. She'd politely declined. "Why would I want to join a club that spent years trying to destroy me?" she'd told the messenger. "I'll build my own legacy, thanks." The old guard was a shadow of its former self. 2 of the 7 houses had been dissolved entirely, their lands redistributed to merchants and soldiers who'd proven their loyalty. The remaining 5 had learned to keep their heads down and their dissent quiet. Thornmarch was changing, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. And Riven had changed with it. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Kyle entering the forge. He still visited regularly, though now as much for her company as for the swords. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a scroll from his jacket. "If it's another promotion, I'm refusing. I already have more responsibility than I know what to do with." "It's not a promotion." He handed her the scroll. "It's a charter for the Ashford Academy of Metalcraft." Riven unrolled the scroll and read. Her hands started shaking. "You're giving me land and funding to start a school? You're always complaining about the guild's training methods. I thought you might want to try your own approach." Kael smiled. "Teach the students they reject. Show them that birth and gender and arbitrary rules don't determine worth. Create the next generation of smiths who'll make even you look obsolete." Riven's throat was too tight to speak. "There's no obligation," Kael added quickly. "If you'd rather focus on the Royal Forge, that's fine. But I thought—" Riven kissed him, cutting off whatever he'd been about to say. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning. "I'll do it," she said. "On one condition." "Name it." "You teach a class on leadership. Show the students that kings can be more than just crowns and commands." "Deal." They stood together in the forge, surrounded by the tools and heat and honest work that had brought them together. Outside, Thornmarch bustled with life, merchants calling their wares, children playing in the streets, the sound of a kingdom learning to be better. "Do you ever miss it?" Kael asked. "The simple life. Just you and your forge, no politics or assassination attempts, or trials by combat." Riven considered the question. A year ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. She'd wanted nothing more than to be left alone to make things. But that was before she'd saved a queen in an alley. Before she'd stood beside a king and helped reshape a kingdom. Before she'd proven to everyone, including herself, that she was more than the city's contempt had tried to make her. "No," she said finally. "I don't miss it. That life was small and safe and suffocating. This life is terrifying and complicated and completely unpredictable. But it's mine. I chose it. I fought for it. And I'm not giving it up for anything." Kyle pulled her close. "Good. Because I'm not letting you go." Dramatic as always. "You love it." "I really do." They stayed like that for a while, wrapped in each other and the knowledge that they'd survived everything the kingdom had thrown at them. Riven Ashford had been called many things in her 23 years: orphan, failure, whore, traitor, unqualified. The slums had rejected her, the guild had dismissed her, the nobles had tried to destroy her. But she was still standing. Not just standing, thriving. She was master of the Royal Forge, founder of an academy that would change the kingdom's future, and partner to a king who saw her not as a symbol or a tool, but as herself. The blacksmith who everyone said didn't belong had proven them all wrong, and she'd done it by refusing to be anything less than exactly who she was. Years later, when historians wrote about the reign of Kyle Valcrest, they would spend entire chapters analyzing his reforms and military victories. But they would always mention the woman who stood beside him, the smith from the slums who'd helped him reshape a kingdom with nothing but skill, courage, and stubborn refusal to quit. They would call her many things: master, champion, revolutionary. But Riven preferred the simplest title, herself. And in the end, that was enough.